The Ben Franklin effect is a curious quirk of human psychology that defies logic but runs deep in our behavior. It reveals something strange. When someone does you a favor, especially a small one, they are more likely to like you, not less. It sounds backward, doesn't it? But it's a psychological loop that flips our assumptions inside out. Rather than disliking someone they help, people unconsciously adjust their feelings to align with their actions. If I did something kind for you, their brain reasons, then I must like you. Ben Franklin Effect. This effect is named after Benjamin Franklin, who cleverly turned a rival legislator into a friend by asking to borrow a rare book. After the rival complied, and Franklin returned the book with gratitude, something shifted. The man's antagonism faded, and the two became allies. Franklin later wrote, "He that has once done you a kindness will be more ready to do you another." It all comes down to cognitive dissonance. Our brains don't like contradictions. When someone helps a person they previously disliked, their mind scrambles to justify the action. The easiest resolution? Change the feeling. Turn dislike into fondness. Justify the behavior by reshaping the perception. This makes the Ben Franklin effect a powerful tool for disarming hostility, building rapport, and even winning over skeptics. Ask for help, even a small one, from someone who doubts or dislikes you. You're not just receiving a favor, you're triggering a rewiring of their emotional state, and that shift can unlock trust, connection, and influence in the most unexpected places. Crab mentality. Crab mentality is one of the most tragic patterns in human behavior because it reveals how people can become each other's worst enemies when they feel threatened by success. The name comes from a cruel phenomenon. When crabs are trapped in a bucket, any that try to climb out will be pulled back down by the others. None escape, not because of the trap itself, but because of each other. And this same pattern plays out in families, friendships, workplaces, and entire cultures. It shows up when someone begins to grow, change, or reach higher, and others, instead of encouraging them, tear them down. It's the coworker who mocks you for working late, the friend who belittles your goals, the sibling who scoffs at your dreams. They don't always know they're doing it, but deep down, your progress threatens their comfort. It reflects what they're not doing, and rather than face that discomfort, they sabotage you. Crab mentality thrives in environments ruled by insecurity. When people feel powerless or stuck, seeing someone rise reminds them of their own chains, so they grasp at control the only way they can, by pulling others back to their level. It can wear the disguise of sarcasm, passive aggression, or even concern, but its intention is clear. Don't rise, because if you do, I'll be left behind. What makes this behavior so dangerous is its subtlety. It doesn't always look like sabotage. Sometimes it sounds like, "Don't get your hopes up," or "You've changed," but every tug is a message. Stay in the bucket, stay small, stay with us. Doormat Syndrome. Doormat Syndrome is the silent erosion of self-worth that happens when a person constantly prioritizes others' needs while burying their own. It's the person who says yes when every fiber of their body screams no, the one who apologizes even when they're not at fault, who bites their tongue to keep the peace, who gives and gives until there's nothing left. And the world, seeing this, rarely stops to thank them. It just asks for more. This behavior often grows from a deep-rooted fear of rejection or conflict. Somewhere along the way, they learn that love must be earned through sacrifice, that harmony is safer than honesty, and that being needed is a substitute for being valued. So they become emotional contortionists, twisting themselves into whatever shape others desire. But inside, the weight builds, resentment grows, exhaustion settles in. People with Doormat Syndrome are often praised for being nice, loyal, or selfless, but these compliments mask a painful truth. They are seen as convenient, not cherished. They attract takers, those who exploit their kindness, because they never push back. And the longer they stay silent, the more invisible they become, even to themselves. The tragedy is that the more they give up parts of themselves to keep others happy, the more disconnected they become from their own identity. They forget what they want, what they believe, what they deserve, and eventually they begin to wonder if their needs even matter at all. But beneath every doormat is a voice, tired, unheard, but still alive, whispering, "You don't have to live like this." Sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy is the mental trap that chains people to the past, forcing them to keep investing time, energy, money, or love into something that's already lost, simply because they've invested so much already. It's the reason people stay in dead-end jobs, toxic relationships, failing businesses, and one-sided friendships. They think, "I've come this far, I can't quit now." But in truth, they're not moving forward, they're sinking. This fallacy feeds on emotion, not logic. It whispers, "Don't waste what you gave," but what's already spent, time you'll never get back, money you'll never see again, feelings already exhausted, is gone, no matter what you do next. Yet people cling to the hope that by sacrificing more, they'll make the past investment worth it. It's not just painful, it's paralyzing. You may know something is broken, that it's hurting you, draining you, even ruining you, but walking away would feel like admitting it was all for nothing, that the years were wasted, that the love was unreturned, that the dream failed, and for many, that truth is too heavy to face, so they stay, not because it's working, but because they can't bear to start over. But the longer they hold on, the more they lose. This fallacy doesn't just keep people stuck, it robs them of the future by chaining them to the past. And the hardest part is this: the only way to win is to walk away, to grieve the loss, release the weight, and choose freedom over pride, not because it wasn't real, but because you are. False consensus effect. The false consensus effect is the invisible filter through which we view the world, one that convinces us our beliefs, preferences, and values are more common than they actually are. It's the silent assumption that most people see the world the way we do, think like we think, and would make the same choices we make. But this belief, while comforting, is often a lie, and it can blind us to the truth, isolate us, and even breed resentment. It begins subtly. You speak your opinion and assume it's the norm. You see others disagree and think they're the outliers. You overestimate how many people share your worldview, not because you're arrogant, but because your reality has been built in a bubble. We surround ourselves with people who reflect us, who reinforce what we already believe, and before long, it feels like everyone must think this way. When they don't, it feels personal, wrong, even threatening. This illusion intensifies in social groups, political ideologies, and online echo chambers, where algorithms serve us more of what we already believe. Suddenly, stepping outside our viewpoint feels like walking into hostile territory. We stop being curious, we stop listening, and we assume others are just uninformed, irrational, or malicious for thinking differently. But the most dangerous part of the false consensus effect isn't what it makes us believe, it's what it makes us miss. We stop seeing the diversity of thought, the richness of perspective, and the humanity in those who disagree. And in doing so, we lose not only connection, but the chance to grow. Tragedy of the Commons. The tragedy of the commons is a haunting reflection of human nature, where individuals, acting in their own self-interest, slowly destroy the very thing they all depend on. It's the farmer who lets more cattle graze than the land can sustain, the factory that dumps just a little more waste into the river, the tourist who takes one extra shell from a fragile beach. No single act breaks the system, but together they unravel it. At its core, this pattern reveals how short-term gain often blinds us to long-term ruin. When a resource is shared, air, water, land, community, trust, everyone assumes someone else will hold back, but no one wants to be the fool who sacrifices while others exploit. So slowly, the collective well is poison. This isn't just about nature, it's about everything we rely on together. Think of shared workspaces trashed by thoughtless coworkers, group projects carried by a few while others coast, societies eroded by selfishness disguised as independence. It's the painful realization that when everyone does just a little, it adds up to everything. And the tragedy lies in its predictability. We know the outcome, we see the collapse coming, but unless someone intervenes, unless we feel a personal stake in protecting what we share, we let it happen anyway. Because restraint feels like loss, responsibility feels like weakness, and the illusion of just me becomes the very thing that costs us all. In the end, it's not the commons that fail, it's our ability to protect what we need from who we think we are. Cheerleader Effect. The cheerleader effect is a strange illusion of attraction that lives in our subconscious, making people appear more appealing when they are seen in a group than when they're viewed alone. It's why someone might catch your eye in a lively crowd but seems surprisingly average in isolation. This phenomenon isn't just about physical beauty, it's about how our brain edits reality to fit what it wants to see. The effect comes from the way our minds process information. When you look at a group, your brain takes mental shortcuts. It averages faces, smooths out flaws, fills in gaps. Minor imperfections are softened. Expression becomes context. You don't see one person, you see the energy of many. And that collective presence casts a glow on each individual, elevating their perceived attractiveness. It's part biology, part psychology. We're drawn to social validation. When we see someone surrounded by others, our instincts whisper, they belong, they're liked, they matter. That social proof triggers a subtle shift in perception. Confidence becomes more magnetic. Smiles seem more genuine. Presence feels more valuable. It's not about beauty, it's about belonging. This effect plays out everywhere, at parties, in photos, in the workplace. It's why marketers group models together in ads, why influencers post squad shots, why even in dating profiles, a solo picture sometimes feels less compelling than a group moment. We're wired to believe that inclusion equals worth, but when the crowd disappears, the illusion fades, and what's left isn't always disappointing, but it's real. The cheerleader effect reveals how context can trick us, how presence can be amplified, and how much of our desire is shaped by the people standing beside us. Pseudocertainty Effect. The pseudocertainty effect is the quiet thief of wise decisions, seducing people with the illusion of safety in a world that offers none. It's a psychological trap that makes us irrationally avoid risk when outcomes feel certain, even if the safe choice is worse in the long run. We crave clarity so deeply that we'll trade real opportunity for the comforting lie of predictability. Imagine you're given a choice, a 100% chance to save 200 lives or a 33% chance to save 600. Most choose the sure thing, even though the second option offers the same or greater hope. Why? Because certainty calms our fear, and fear is louder than math. When faced with risk, even calculated risk, our brain doesn't weigh the numbers, it listens to the emotion. This effect shows up in money, relationships, health, and war. We stick with low-paying jobs that feel stable, even when better ones are within reach. We stay in mediocre relationships because at least it's something. We vote for promises that offer instant results instead of long-term solutions. We buy insurance we don't need and avoid bold moves that could change our lives because risk, even with reward, terrifies us more than slow decline. The pseudo-certainty effect preys on our fear of regret. We would rather be safely miserable than possibly wrong. But the tragedy is this: in avoiding uncertainty, we often guarantee failure. We sacrifice growth, love, and possibility at the altar of false security. And sometimes, the greatest risk isn't taking the chance, it's refusing to. Empathy gap. The empathy gap is the invisible wall between what we feel now and what we used to feel, or might feel in the future. It's the reason we can't understand why we acted so impulsively when we were angry, or why someone else seems frozen by fear when we feel calm. It's the gap that separates our rational self from our emotional self, and it creates one of the most painful forms of human misunderstanding. When you're not in a certain emotional state, it becomes nearly impossible to imagine what that state truly feels like. When you're calm, you can't fully grasp the chaos of rage. When you're sober, you underestimate how cravings can control you. When you're happy, you forget what despair felt like. This detachment makes us misjudge ourselves and others. We become impatient, dismissive, or cruel, not out of malice, but because we simply can't feel what they feel. It's why we give shallow advice to someone grieving, why we tell someone with anxiety to just relax, why we shame our past selves for breaking down. The empathy gap makes emotions look weak from the outside. It strips them of depth, of weight, of truth, and it tricks us into believing that logic alone should be enough. But emotions are not weak. They are storms. They hijack reason, override planning, and reshape memory. And when we are not in the storm, we forget the wind, we forget the fear, we forget the pain, and in doing so, we risk losing our ability to connect with others and with ourselves. Mere exposure effect. The mere exposure effect is one of the most quietly powerful forces shaping our preferences without us even realizing it. It's the reason we grow to like a song we once ignored, why that coworker we barely noticed becomes oddly attractive over time, and why brands flood our lives with repetition. Familiarity doesn't just breed comfort, it breeds affection. The more we see something, the more we tend to like it. Not because it's better, but because it's familiar. Our brains are wired for survival, and unfamiliar things once signal danger, so repetition eases that tension. What once felt uncertain becomes safe. What was once unnoticed becomes trusted. Over time, exposure becomes association, and association becomes affection. This is why people stay in relationships that don't fulfill them, why we return to the same restaurants, shows, and routines. It's not that they're the best, it's that they're familiar. And familiarity, for many, feels like love. But here's the trap. The mere exposure effect doesn't care about quality. It doesn't care about truth. It only rewards repetition, which means it can be used, manipulated to control desire. Marketers know it. Politicians know it. Even manipulators know it. Repeat a message enough times and it starts to feel true. Show a face enough times and it becomes likable. Familiarity wears the mask of preference. And the scariest part, you won't feel the shift. You'll just wake up one day and believe you've chosen something freely, when in truth, you were conditioned to. It's not what we love that shapes our attention. Sometimes it's what we see the most that shapes what we love. Illusory superiority. Illusory superiority is the quiet, constant delusion that you are better than most people around you, more capable, more ethical, more intelligent, more skilled. It doesn't shout. It doesn't brag. It hides behind casual thoughts like, at least I'm not like them, or I would have handled that better. It's not arrogance. It's a defense mechanism. And it's everywhere. This cognitive distortion is baked into the human psyche. Most people believe they're above average, even though that's statistically impossible. We judge ourselves by our intentions, but others by their outcomes. When we make mistakes, we explain them away. When others do, we question their character. It's not always cruel. It's subconscious self-protection, a shield against self-doubt. But this illusion comes at a cost. It blinds us to our weaknesses, making growth nearly impossible. It breeds impatience and contempt for others who struggle. It creates distance, because if you're always above, others are always below. And when life humbles you, as it inevitably will, that fall from imagined superiority is brutal. Suddenly, you're not just failing, you're failing as someone who thought they were too smart to fail. Illusory superiority feeds ego while starving empathy. It convinces people they're the exception, the better one, the unflawed. But behind that comfort is fear, the fear of being ordinary, vulnerable, or wrong. And so we cling to the illusion, even as it quietly corrodes our relationships, our humility, and our capacity to truly understand others. Hedonic Treadmill. The hedonic treadmill is the cruel illusion of lasting happiness, the feeling that if you just reach that next milestone, get that next raise, meet that next person, then finally, you'll feel fulfilled. But no matter how far you run, how much you achieve, or how high you climb, the joy fades and you're back where you started, wanting more, always wanting more. It's not your fault. The human brain is wired to adapt. That dream job you once prayed for, it becomes routine. That relationship you couldn't stop smiling about, it normalizes. The new car, the upgraded phone, the beautiful house, all of them lose their magic with time. And once the thrill disappears, a new goal takes its place. You chase it, catch it, and start running again. That's the treadmill. We confuse moments of pleasure with lasting happiness. We believe milestones will save us from emptiness. But the truth is darker. External achievements don't change our baseline for long. We return to our emotional set point, even after triumph or tragedy. That's why lottery winners and accident survivors often report similar levels of happiness a year later, because the world changes, but the treadmill stays the same. This pattern keeps us hungry, but never satisfied. It turns life into a chase where contentment is always just out of reach. It whispers, "More will fix it," when in reality, the more we sprint toward fulfillment, the more we exhaust ourselves in pursuit of a high that was never meant to last. The danger isn't in wanting, it's in believing arrival equals peace. Social comparison theory. Social comparison theory is the internal tug of war that shapes your self-worth, not by who you are, but by who you believe you are compared to someone else. It's the invisible scoreboard running in your mind, measuring success, beauty, intelligence, and happiness against every person you encounter. And it rarely ends in peace. This instinct is ancient. We evolved to compare because comparison helped us survive. Where do I stand in the tribe? Am I strong enough, attractive enough, safe enough? But in the modern world, this survival mechanism has become a source of suffering. Now, we compare our behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel, especially in the age of social media. Every scroll tells a lie. They have more. They are more. You're behind. And that whisper becomes a roar. Upward comparison, looking at those above you, can inspire growth, but more often it breeds envy and self-hate. Downward comparison, looking at those below, can boost ego, but it builds arrogance, not joy. Both can isolate you from your authentic self, because when you're constantly looking sideways, you stop looking inward. The worst part? Social comparison is addictive. The more you do it, the more you need it. You begin to crave validation through external metrics, likes, status, attention. You lose sight of your own path and instead chase someone else's definition of success. It's a race with no finish line and no winner, because no matter how far you climb, someone will always be ahead. And if you don't break the cycle, you'll never feel like you're enough, even when you are. Reactance is the rebel inside your mind, the sudden, often uncontrollable resistance that flares up the moment someone tries to take away your freedom to choose. It doesn't matter if the advice is good, the rule is reasonable, or the person means well. The instant you feel forced, pressured, or boxed in, something ancient awakens. It's not just disagreement, it's defiance, a gut-level urge to push back, to reclaim control, even if it means acting against your own best interest. Tell a teenager they have to clean their room and they won't. Ban a book and it becomes the most sought-after read. Demand someone calm down and their emotions explode. That's reactance. It's why people dig in during arguments, why ultimatums often fail, and why subtle persuasion works better than commands. The moment we feel our autonomy is under threat, we don't just resist, we fight back. This behavior runs deeper than pride. Reactance is rooted in survival. Autonomy meant survival to our ancestors. Control over one's choices meant control over one's fate. So when modern life pressures us, through authority, expectation, or even love, we instinctively guard our freedom, often without realizing it. Ironically, the more pressure someone uses to convince us, the more likely we are to reject the message entirely. Even if we agree deep down, the way it's delivered makes it unbearable. That's the painful paradox. We'd rather be wrong on our own terms than right on someone else's. And in moments of emotional pressure, we don't just resist the rule, we resist the person behind it. Just world hypothesis. The just world hypothesis is the quiet lie we tell ourselves to feel safe, that the world is fair, that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to those who deserve it. It's comforting. It gives us a sense of order in a chaotic world. It lets us believe that if we play by the rules, life will reward us. But this belief, though soothing, often turns cruel. When tragedy strikes someone else, the just world hypothesis urges us to search for reasons. They must have done something wrong. They should have known better. Maybe they brought it on themselves. It's not always spoken aloud, but it shapes how we judge victims of abuse, poverty, illness, or failure. We cling to the illusion that their suffering must be justified, because if it isn't, then suffering could happen to anyone, even us. This need to believe in fairness often leads to blame instead of empathy. It makes us turn away from people in pain because their reality threatens our illusion. If bad things happen to good people, then nothing is guaranteed. Then control is just a story. Then life is fragile, and that truth is terrifying. So we pretend. We look for flaws in the fallen. We romanticize success as proof of virtue. We protect our sense of justice, even at the cost of our compassion. But the world isn't fair. It's complex. And the sooner we stop forcing life into moral equations, the more room we make for real empathy and the strength to face life as it truly is. Information avoidance. Information avoidance is the heartbreaking decision to stay in the dark, on purpose. It's not ignorance. It's the quiet, willful turning away from truth, because knowing might hurt more than not knowing. It's the unopened test results, the bank account left unchecked, the relationship issues swept under the rug. It's when people avoid the mirror, the scale, the conversation, because deep down, they already know what they'll find. But seeing it makes it real, and once it's real, you can't pretend anymore. This behavior doesn't come from laziness. It comes from fear. Fear that the truth will force change. Fear that it will confirm what we've been trying to deny. So we choose comfort over clarity. We protect our present peace at the expense of our future stability. But that protection is fragile. It cracks slowly, under stress, under silence, under the weight of everything left unspoken. Information avoidance is seductive. It offers short-term relief, the illusion of control, but it never lasts. The truth waits, and the longer it's ignored, the more power it gains. A neglected health issue becomes a crisis. An ignored red flag becomes heartbreak. An untouched deadline becomes disaster. What begins as protection eventually becomes self-sabotage. And the cruelest part? Many people already know the truth in their bones. They just haven't seen it in words or numbers or voices yet, because once they do, they'll have to act. And for some, the unknown pain of action feels worse than the known ache of avoidance, until it doesn't. Moral licensing. Moral licensing is the quiet permission slip we give ourselves after doing something good, a psychological loophole that allows us to act in ways that contradict our values, because we've already proven we have them. It's the reason someone donates to charity in the morning and lies that same afternoon. The reason we excuse a harsh word by remembering a kind one we said earlier. Deep down, it's not hypocrisy. It's the brain trying to balance its internal moral ledger. When you do something virtuous, your mind files it away as evidence of your goodness. You feel moral, proud, even righteous. But then, almost imperceptibly, the scale tips. That goodness becomes currency, spent to justify behavior that would normally trigger guilt. I'm a good person, you tell yourself. So this one little thing doesn't count. It's seductive because it feels fair, like earning cheat codes for morality. You were disciplined, so you deserve indulgence. You were kind, so you can afford cruelty. But this mental math chips away at character, choice by choice. It creates a version of morality built on transactions, not integrity, where doing the right thing is no longer about who you are, but about buying freedom from accountability. Moral licensing is why some people with the loudest public virtues harbor the darkest private behaviors. It's how we rationalize double standards in ourselves while condemning them in others. And it's dangerous because it disguises rot as righteousness. It lets us believe we're still the hero, even when we're slipping into the role of the villain. Cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the mental war that erupts when your beliefs clash with your actions. It's the internal tension of smoking while knowing it kills, loving someone who keeps hurting you, preaching honesty while telling lies. It's the split between what you say you believe and what you actually do. And that split doesn't just cause discomfort, it causes psychological pain so deep your brain will do almost anything to resolve it. When faced with this contradiction, your mind has two options: change your behavior or twist reality. And more often than not, reality is what bends. Smokers convince themselves it reduces stress. Cheaters say everyone does it. Victims defend their abusers by saying it's not always bad. These mental acrobatics aren't lies in the traditional sense. They're survival mechanisms, because holding two truths that don't fit together feels like slowly unraveling from the inside. This dissonance eats at our identity. It shakes our sense of integrity, our self-worth, our moral compass. So we justify, rationalize, deflect, anything to ease the friction. And in doing so, we may start believing our own distortions just to find peace. But unresolved dissonance festers. It creates guilt we can't name, anxiety we can't trace, and shame we can't shake. It pushes people into denial, into delusion, or into silence. Because admitting the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be takes terrifying honesty. And yet, it's only by facing that gap that true alignment and peace can ever begin. Observer Expectancy Effect. The Observer Expectancy Effect is a haunting truth about human interaction. What we expect in others can quietly shape who they become. Without saying a word, our beliefs, our facial expressions, our tone, even the way we ask a question, can pull people toward a version of themselves they weren't meant to be. Sometimes higher, sometimes lower, but always altered. It begins with a thought: they're not capable, they're brilliant, they'll probably fail, they're a natural. That thought seeps into how we treat them. Our encouragement becomes laced with pressure. Our doubts are hidden in polite indifference. A teacher expects a child to struggle, and so they unconsciously give them less attention, less challenge. A manager believes an employee lacks drive, and so their praise grows colder. Bit by bit, those subtle cues shift behavior until the subject starts to mirror the expectation. It's not manipulation. It's influence by belief. We don't even realize we're doing it, and that's what makes it so powerful and so dangerous. This effect explains why two people with the same potential can be treated differently and grow into completely different versions of themselves. It explains how gifted children are overlooked, how outsiders are underestimated, how favoritism fuels success, not through merit, but through exposure to belief. What we expect of someone is not harmless. It's a script handed to them, often without consent, and they may perform it for years before realizing the lines were never their own. In the hands of a mentor, this effect can uplift. In the hands of bias, it can destroy. Dunning-Kruger Effect. The Dunning-Kruger Effect is the cruel joke our brain plays on us. The terrifying confidence of the unskilled. It's when someone knows so little about a subject that they can't even recognize their own ignorance. And yet, that very ignorance gives them the illusion of mastery. They speak with certainty. They argue with passion. They believe they're right, while being hopelessly wrong. This isn't arrogance. It's blindness. You can't see the edges of a map if you've never explored it. And people trapped in this effect truly don't know what they don't know. Their knowledge is so shallow, it feels complete. Meanwhile, those with real understanding are often filled with self-doubt because they do see the complexity, the exceptions, the nuance, and they fear they know too little. This creates a disturbing imbalance. The loudest voices in the room are often the least informed. The confident spread misinformation. The cautious stay silent, and society ends up following the bold, not the wise. It happens everywhere, in politics, relationships, workplaces. The employee who overestimates their abilities, the partner who thinks they know you better than you know yourself, the leader who refuses expert advice, convinced they see the full picture. The Dunning-Kruger effect isn't just annoying, it's dangerous. It spreads false certainty, fuels division, and crushes humility. And the only antidote is awareness. But here's the irony. Once you start to see your blind spots, you enter the valley of self-doubt. You feel less sure, less proud, more cautious, and that's exactly when you're finally starting to learn. Foot in the door technique. The foot in the door technique is the art of gaining agreement by asking for a little before you ask for a lot. It's subtle, strategic, and often invisible. Someone gets you to say yes to something small, harmless, almost meaningless. A survey, a favor, a signature. But that yes is a crack in the door, and once it's open, it's hard to close. This technique works not because of manipulation, but because of identity. When you agree to a small request, your mind rewrites the narrative. I said yes. I'm the kind of person who helps. I must believe in this. And when the next, larger request comes, your internal compass leans toward consistency. Saying no now feels like contradiction. You feel obligated, not by force, but by your own previous choice. Salespeople use it, activists use it, partners, parents, politicians. It's everywhere because it taps into a primal need, the need to stay aligned with our own actions, to avoid dissonance, and to feel good about who we are. But what makes this technique so powerful is that it doesn't feel like pressure. It feels like momentum. And by the time the real ask arrives, your time, your money, your commitment, you're already halfway through the door. This is how strangers become donors, how friends get roped into obligations, how small talk turns into deep compliance, not through persuasion, but progression. Each yes rewrites your story, and if you're not paying attention, you won't even notice the shift until you're standing in a room you never intended to enter, wondering how you got there. Halo Effect. The halo effect is the illusion that turns beauty into virtue, charm into competence, and confidence into truth. It's the reason we assume someone is intelligent because they're attractive, that they're kind because they smile, that they're trustworthy because they speak well. One good trait casts a glow that blinds us to everything else, and we don't even realize it's happening. It starts the moment we meet someone. We scan, we judge, and if we find one appealing quality, physical beauty, charisma, status, our brain shortcuts the rest. We begin to see them as better in every way. A handsome person must be smart. A popular person must be moral. A smooth talker must be capable. But often, we're not seeing the person at all. We're seeing the reflection of that one shining trait and filling in the rest with wishful thinking. The halo effect influences everything from hiring decisions to courtroom verdicts, teacher evaluations to dating choices. It's why confident people get promoted, even if others are more skilled, why some are forgiven easily, while others are punished harshly for the same mistake. It's not merit, it's perception, distorted by glow. And this illusion is dangerous. It protects manipulators, enables toxic charm, and blinds us to red flags. It keeps us loyal to people who haven't earned it, simply because we once admired something about them. And worst of all, it makes us question ourselves around them, because if they seem so perfect, our doubts must be our fault. But the glow isn't real. It's a mask, and the truth only appears when we stop worshiping light and start looking into the shadows. Horn Effect. The Horn Effect is the dark mirror of human judgment, the way one negative trait, one flaw, one mistake can poison everything else we see in a person. It's the reason someone with a sharp tongue is assumed to be cold-hearted, the reason a single failure overshadows years of effort, the reason we reduce people to their worst moments and forget everything else they are. It starts with one impression. Maybe they speak too loudly, miss a deadline, dress in a way you don't respect, and suddenly, without knowing them, your mind begins to color their whole identity with that single stroke. They become incompetent, rude, irresponsible. You stop looking deeper. You stop being curious. Their humanity flattens into a label. The Horn Effect is dangerous because it feels like clarity. It convinces you that you're simply being observant or honest, when really you're filtering truth through a distorted lens. You stop giving people second chances. You write off nuance, and in doing so, you deny others the grace you quietly hope to receive when you fall short yourself. This effect creeps into workplaces, classrooms, families. A child labeled as difficult is treated with less patience. An employee with an awkward demeanor is overlooked for promotion. A partner's one flaw becomes the centerpiece of every argument, and each time the judgment grows heavier than the person it's placed upon. We forget that people are not their worst moment. We forget how much we want to be seen beyond ours. The Horn Effect doesn't just diminish others, it diminishes our capacity to love, forgive, and understand. In-group bias. In-group bias is the invisible loyalty we give to us, whoever that may be, at the cost of them. It's the instinct to favor, defend, and trust people who belong to our group, even when they're wrong, and to judge, fear, or exclude outsiders, even when they've done nothing wrong. It doesn't matter whether the group is a family, a nation, a religion, a political party, or even a sports team. Once we feel we belong, we build walls. This bias begins with identity. We all want to feel like we're part of something bigger. We crave belonging, safety, and connection. But once we find it, something primitive awakens, a subtle belief that our group is better, smarter, more moral. And without realizing it, we begin to treat others as less trustworthy, less human, less worthy of empathy. In-group bias shows up in how we hire, who we befriend, who we forgive, and who we punish. It's why we give our team the benefit of the doubt, but demand perfection from outsiders. Why we believe scandals when they involve them, but defend the same behavior in us. It's not logic, it's tribal reflex, and it's dangerous. It fuels racism, extremism, and injustice. It creates echo chambers where bad ideas thrive because no one questions their own side. It divides communities, ruins relationships, starts wars, not with hatred, but with quiet favoritism disguised as pride. In-group bias doesn't feel like bias, it feels like loyalty. But sometimes the hardest truth to face is that our group is just a group, not the truth, not the light, not the right, just one side of the story. Outgroup homogeneity. Outgroup homogeneity is the silent bias that convinces us they are all the same. It's the belief that people outside our group, whether defined by race, gender, politics, religion, or lifestyle are less varied, less complex, and less individual than those within our own tribe. We see us as diverse, layered, full of nuance, but them, we flatten into a stereotype. This bias doesn't always come from hate. Often, it comes from distance. When we don't know people personally, our brains take shortcuts. We fill in gaps with assumptions. We simplify. We generalize. We let one loud example represent millions. And the more unfamiliar the group, the more exaggerated the illusion becomes. It shows up in the way we speak. They all think like that. That's just how those people are. Of course someone like that would say that. It shows up in fear, in mockery, in silence. It shows up in how we vote, hire, socialize, and teach our children. And we barely notice it's there. But this bias is not harmless. It fuels prejudice. It justifies exclusion. It makes it easier to dehumanize, to judge, to turn away, because it's harder to feel compassion for a type than for a person. When we reduce people to a single identity, we strip them of their stories, their contradictions, their pain. Outgroup homogeneity builds invisible walls between us, and the tragic irony is this: the more we see them as the same, the more we become blind to the sameness in all of us. Our fears, our longing, our aching need to be seen as more than a label. Precrastination. Precrastination is the urge to start things immediately, even if it costs you more time, energy, or effort in the long run. It's the compulsion to cross something off your list, not because it's important, but because it's there. That anxiety of the unfinished becomes louder than the logic of doing it right. And so we rush, not out of laziness, but out of the unbearable tension of the undone. It looks productive on the surface. The person who answers emails right away, grabs the first solution without thinking, or starts packing before knowing what to bring. But underneath that surface is fear. Fear of mental clutter, of unknowns, of pressure building. Precrastinators don't procrastinate. They do the opposite. They lunge at tasks, eager to quiet the noise, to regain control. But in doing so, they often make decisions too fast, overlook details, or exhaust themselves doing things out of order. This behavior comes from a deep psychological need to feel relieved. That brief high of getting it done offers instant reward, but the cost is hidden. Tasks need redoing, energy is wasted, and better options are missed. It's not laziness, it's anxiety in disguise. Precrastination can damage relationships too. It can make people seem pushy, impatient, or controlling, when really they're trying to outrun their own unease. They're not in love with speed. They're terrified of weight, the weight of the unfinished, the weight of not yet. But speed isn't peace, and sometimes waiting, not rushing, is the braver choice, because clarity doesn't always arrive first. Sometimes it comes last. Abilene Paradox. The Abilene Paradox is the quiet disaster of group decision-making, the moment when everyone agrees to something that no one actually wants, just because they think everyone else wants it. It's a tragedy of silence, a dance of assumptions, and it happens more often than we admit. It usually starts with one polite suggestion. Maybe someone proposes an idea, not because they love it, but because they think it might be acceptable. No one objects because they don't want to seem difficult or negative or different, so they nod, smile, go along. One by one, each person surrenders their true opinion, thinking they're the only one who disagrees, and what unfolds next is a chain reaction of quiet betrayal, not of others but of self. You find yourself committing to a trip you didn't want to take, agreeing to a project that drains you, staying in a relationship that isn't working, all because no one spoke the truth, including you. The Abilene Paradox is not about pressure. It's about fear, fear of disapproval, fear of conflict, fear of being the odd one out. So we choose the discomfort of going along over the risk of standing up. But inside, we stew, we blame others, we feel frustrated, even resentful, never realizing that everyone else feels the same. This paradox doesn't just waste time, it erodes trust. It creates a world where people feel unheard, even in rooms full of agreement, and where authenticity is swallowed by the illusion of harmony. Everyone nods, everyone suffers, and no one ever meant to say yes. Spotlight Effect. The spotlight effect is the crushing illusion that everyone is watching you, that every flaw is noticed, every awkward moment replayed, every stumble judged. You feel like you're standing under a beam of light, exposed, vulnerable, scrutinized, when in truth, most people aren't looking at all. They're too consumed by their own spotlight to notice yours. This distortion lives deep in our minds. It whispers that your bad hair day is everyone's topic of conversation, that the joke you messed up echoes in the room long after it's told, that your nervousness, your outfit, your every imperfection is under inspection. But here's the reality. Most people forget, most never saw, most never cared. We are all the center of our own worlds, and that makes it easy to believe we're the center of everyone else's. But we aren't. The spotlight is an illusion cast by self-consciousness and insecurity, made stronger by anxiety, perfectionism, and shame. It traps you in fear and silences your voice. It convinces you that being seen means being judged. This effect keeps people from speaking up, from dancing freely, from trying something new. It paralyzes action with the fear of embarrassment, when in truth, most of the time, others are too wrapped up in their own insecurities to even notice yours. But the pain feels real, the spotlight feels blinding, and so we shrink ourselves out of a fear that lives more in our minds than in the eyes of others, because the harshest spotlight we ever stand under is our own. Planning fallacy. The planning fallacy is the beautiful lie we keep telling ourselves, that this time it'll be different. This time we'll be on schedule. This time we'll finish early. This time we won't underestimate the work, the time, the chaos. But almost every time we do, and then we're left staring at unfinished tasks, broken timelines, and stress we never saw coming because we were too optimistic to see the truth. It's not stupidity, it's human nature. We are wired to imagine best-case scenarios. We picture how things should go, not how they usually go. We forget the delays, the detours, the interruptions that always seem to show up. Our memory of past mistakes fades under the glow of a fresh start. We think, this project is smaller, this week is clearer, I'll be more focused this time, and that belief blinds us. The planning fallacy doesn't just apply to tasks, it seeps into life itself. We underestimate how long it takes to heal, to grow, to build something real, and when things take longer than we hoped, we panic. We think we're failing, when really, we're just human. This fallacy leads to missed deadlines, broken commitments, and unnecessary guilt. But it also feeds self-deception. We keep saying yes. We keep overpromising. We keep believing we're superhuman, only to collapse under the weight of our own expectations. The danger isn't in the optimism. It's in forgetting reality. Because reality is messy. It demands more time, more patience, more flexibility, but the mind clings to its fantasy of efficiency. And in doing so, it builds a plan, not for life, but for a version of life that doesn't exist. Bystander Effect. The Bystander Effect is the chilling truth that in moments of crisis, the more people who witness suffering, the less likely anyone is to help. It's the heartbreaking silence when someone cries for help in a crowd, the frozen stares on a subway when a person collapses, the collective inaction that lets injustice unfold in plain sight, not because people don't care, but because they think someone else will. This behavior is born from diffusion of responsibility. When we're alone and see someone in need, we feel personally responsible, but when others are present, that weight spreads thin. Surely someone else will step in, surely someone more qualified, surely someone braver, and in that hesitation, seconds pass, and sometimes lives are lost. It's not about cruelty, It's about uncertainty. People look to each other for cues. If no one reacts, we assume the situation must not be urgent, or worse, that we'd be wrong to intervene. So we wait, we watch, we hope someone else will be the one to break the silence. But the cruel twist is this: everyone is thinking the same thing, and so no one moves. The bystander effect reveals a haunting fragility in human empathy, how easily it can be diluted, how quickly it can vanish in the fog of the collective, and how desperately the world needs that one person to ignore the crowd, to step forward anyway, and to say with action, "I see you, I'm here," because sometimes the first to move doesn't just save a life, they awaken everyone else. Pareidolia. Pareidolia is the eerie, enchanting tendency of the human mind to see meaning where none exists, to find faces in the clouds, creatures in the shadows, and eyes staring back from electrical outlets. It's why the moon has a man, why toast seems to carry divine messages, and why a coat draped on a chair in a dark room can send a jolt of fear through your chest. It's not madness, it's the brain doing what it's built to do, make sense of the world, even if it has to invent that sense from chaos. We are wired to detect patterns, especially faces, because faces mean life, connection, threat, safety. From infancy, our survival has depended on reading expressions, so our brains became hypersensitive to anything that even resembles a face. 2 dots and a line? That's a face. That's a presence. That's someone. Pareidolia doesn't just live in fear or superstition. It also breathes life into imagination. It's why we see dragons in mountains, hearts in tree bark, and spirits in smoke. It turns randomness into story, disorder into meaning. It blurs the line between perception and projection. But at its core, pareidolia is a mirror. It reflects how deeply we need connection, so much so that we'll fabricate it when it's absent. We crave meaning in everything we see, even in the meaningless. And sometimes that craving is so strong, it brings inanimate things to life. What you think is watching you from the corner of the room, it's probably nothing. But in that flicker of fear or wonder, your brain just reminded you were never built to live in a world without faces. Clustering illusion. The clustering illusion is the mind's desperate attempt to find patterns where none exist, to turn randomness into meaning, chaos into design. It's why we see lucky streaks in gambling, faces in clouds, or signs in coincidences. Our brains crave order. We are hardwired to believe that if something happens more than once, it must be happening for a reason. This illusion is seductive because it offers comfort. Randomness is terrifying. It means we're not in control, that outcomes aren't fair, that effort doesn't always equal reward. So when things align, repeating numbers, back-to-back wins, a cluster of bad news, we search for a story, a message, a pattern to hold on to. But patterns lie, especially in short bursts of randomness. A coin flip may land on heads 5 times in a row, not because it's rigged, but because probability allows for streaks. A disease may affect 3 neighbors, not because something's wrong, but because clusters happen naturally. Yet our minds shout, "This is not random, this means something." And once the story takes root, it's hard to unsee. We connect dots that were never connected. We build superstitions. We make decisions, not based on truth, but on the illusion of truth. And we rarely question it, because believing in the pattern feels safer than facing the chaos. The clustering illusion doesn't just distort what we see, it shapes what we believe. It's the origin of conspiracy theories, false alarms, and magical thinking, because deep down, we'd rather be wrong about a pattern than admit that sometimes things just happen. Anchoring bias. Anchoring bias is the mental trap that locks your judgment to the first piece of information you receive, no matter how irrelevant, arbitrary, or random it may be. It's why a used car listed at $10,000 feels like a steal at $8,000, even if it's only worth $6,000. It's why your perception of someone's worth your own value, or even how much pain you feel can be shaped by a single initial number or idea. That first impression becomes the anchor, and everything else is dragged around it. This bias doesn't ask for permission. It sinks in fast, quietly setting the standard before you even realize what's happening. A salary expectation, a test score, a suggested donation. Once that anchor is dropped, your brain clings to it. Every future judgment becomes a negotiation around that original point, even when it makes no logical sense. It happens in everyday life. A store marks a $300 jacket down to $199, and suddenly it feels like a bargain, not because it's affordable, but because the anchor was set high. You meet someone and learn one negative thing first, and it colors every future interaction. That single piece of information becomes the lens through which everything else is judged. Anchoring is so powerful because it plays to a deep fear, the fear of being wrong, of not having a baseline, of drifting without certainty. So we seize the first thing we can, we hold it tight, and without realizing it, we let it steer us. Not because it's right, but because it got there first. Self-handicapping. Self-handicapping is the quiet sabotage we perform on ourselves before we even try, an invisible shield we build to protect our ego from the sting of failure. It's the student who doesn't study for the exam, the performer who stays out too late the night before the show, the employee who forgets to prepare for a big pitch. It's not laziness, it's fear, the fear of trying your best and still not being enough. Because if you don't give it your all, then failure doesn't mean you're a failure. It means the odds were stacked. You didn't lose because you lacked talent. You lost because you didn't try. And that makes the disappointment easier to swallow. You still get to protect the idea of who you could be if only you'd really tried. But the price of that protection is steep. Self-handicapping creates a cycle of unfulfilled potential. You never find out what you're capable of because you're too afraid to risk the truth. You clip your own wings, then blame the sky, and with every missed opportunity, your self-doubt grows louder while your self-worth grows dimmer. This behavior can be invisible from the outside, disguised as procrastination, carelessness, or bad luck. But inside, it's a war between the desire to succeed and the terror of finding out that even your best might not be enough. So you leave room for excuses. You build your failure in advance because in a twisted way, it hurts less to fall from halfway up than from the very top. Status quo bias. Status quo bias is the invisible force that keeps people clinging to the familiar, even when the familiar is painful, broken, or slowly destroying them. It's the reason someone stays in a job they hate, a city that suffocates them, a relationship that's long since stopped feeling like home, not because it's good, but because it's known. Change, even when it promises something better, feels dangerous. It stirs up uncertainty, and uncertainty triggers fear. Your brain, built to protect you, mistakes discomfort for threat, and so it whispers a lie that feels like truth. Better the devil you know than the one you don't. You convince yourself that staying is safer than leaping. You rationalize stagnation. You decorate the cage. Status quo bias masquerades as wisdom, caution, maturity, but beneath the surface, it's often just fear in disguise, fear of failure, fear of regret, fear of the unknown. It leads people to choose familiar misery over unfamiliar possibility. And the cost is enormous, not just lost opportunities, but a slow erosion of the self. Every time you choose the status quo, you reinforce the idea that change isn't worth the risk, that comfort, however hollow, is more valuable than growth. But comfort is not peace, and routine is not fulfillment. Status quo bias doesn't just freeze your choices, it freezes your evolution. And one day, you look back at a life made up of small concessions, roads not taken, doors never open, not because you couldn't, but because you didn't let yourself believe there was something more. Ostrich Effect. The Ostrich Effect is the act of emotional survival through willful ignorance, when we bury our heads in the sand, hoping the problem will disappear if we just don't look at it. It's checking your bank account less when you know you've overspent. It's ignoring health symptoms out of fear of a diagnosis. It's avoiding that hard conversation because facing the truth feels more terrifying than living the lie. At its core, the Ostrich Effect is driven by fear, fear of bad news, fear of consequences, fear of pain. So instead of confronting what's wrong, we turn away. We scroll past the warning signs. We silence the inner alarm. And we convince ourselves that not knowing is safer than knowing, that ignorance is a shield, that silence means peace. But that illusion doesn't last, because the problem doesn't stop growing just because we stop watching. The debt multiplies, the disease spreads, the relationship deteriorates, and what could have been a bruise becomes a break, all because we chose comfort over clarity. The irony is brutal. The longer we avoid, the more powerless we become. What starts as emotional protection turns into emotional paralysis, and when reality finally bursts through the walls we built around it, the impact hits harder than if we had faced it from the start. The Ostrich Effect isn't stupidity, it's human. It's a coping mechanism for a world that overwhelms us, but pretending the storm isn't coming won't stop the rain. It only ensures we're standing unprepared when it finally falls. Rosy Retrospection. Rosy Retrospection is the quiet lie memory tells to soften the edges of the past, making things seem sweeter, simpler, and better than they actually were. It's the reason we romanticize old relationships we once cried over, miss jobs we once dreaded, or yearn for childhood moments that were far from perfect. It's not nostalgia, it's distortion, and it can be both beautiful and blinding. Your mind, in its desperate attempt to protect you from pain, edits the past like a highlight reel. The struggles blur, the dull moments fade, and what remains is golden. You remember the laughter, not the silence, the feeling of possibility, not the crushing uncertainty. Even suffering gets rewritten as meaningful, character building, worth it. You cling to memories that feel warmer than the reality ever was, because memory isn't built to be a perfect record. It's built to give meaning. But this selective sweetness can hurt. It can make the present feel dull in comparison, incomplete, like you've lost something you'll never get back. It can keep you stuck, chasing ghosts, comparing real moments to illusions. You begin to wonder if you peaked long ago, if love will never feel like it used to, if happiness is something you had and lost. Rosy Retrospection wraps the past in golden light, and sometimes that comfort is healing. But it can also trap you, because when the past is painted too perfectly, the present will always feel like it's missing something, even when it isn't, even when this ordinary moment is just as worthy, just as alive. Escalation of Commitment. Escalation of commitment is the cruel illusion that if you just keep pushing, sacrificing, and holding on a little longer, all the pain will finally be worth it. It's the voice that says, you've already given so much. How can you walk away now? Even when everything around you is screaming that it's time to let go, you dig in deeper, because giving up would mean admitting it was all for nothing. This is the trap that keeps people in failing relationships, dying businesses, hopeless careers, and dangerous investments, not because they believe it will succeed, but because they can't bear the weight of failure. So they double down, invest more time, more money, more pieces of themselves, all in the name of not losing what they've already lost. But the tragedy is this: the deeper you go, the harder it becomes to escape. Your identity gets tangled in the fight. You stop measuring whether something is working and start measuring how much you've already given. And that backward logic drives you to protect your past, even if it costs your future. Escalation of commitment is not about stubbornness. It's about survival. It's about trying to make meaning from suffering, about proving to yourself and to others that you were right to believe, to try, to stay. But sometimes the most courageous thing you can do isn't to fight harder. It's to stop, to say, this isn't worth the price of who I'm becoming. Yet that moment of truth rarely comes easily, because letting go doesn't just hurt, it haunts. Gambler's Fallacy. The gambler's fallacy is the seductive illusion that chance has a memory, that if something has happened too often, it's due to swing the other way. It's the voice in your head that says, I've lost 5 times in a row. The next one has to be a win. It feels logical. It feels fair. But it's a lie, a dangerous one, and it doesn't just haunt casinos. It plays out in life, love, and every place where hope collides with randomness. At its core, this fallacy is the belief that randomness should be balanced in the short term. Flip a coin and get heads 5 times? Your instincts scream that tails must come next. But in reality, the odds haven't changed. The coin doesn't care. Each flip is still 50-50, untouched by the ones before it. But your heart doesn't believe that, because fairness feels like a law of the universe, not a myth. This illusion doesn't just cost people money, it costs them time, trust, sanity. People stay in toxic relationships thinking, after all this pain, love must finally come. They keep pouring effort into lost causes, believing the universe owes them a win. They treat life like a roulette wheel that will eventually land on their number if they just hold out long enough. But chance is cold. It doesn't reward persistence. It doesn't balance itself to make things fair. And the more we cling to the gambler's fallacy, the more we bleed into emptiness, convinced that our suffering must be building towards something, when sometimes it's just luck or the lack of it. Normative social influence. Normative social influence is the invisible force that bends your behavior, your voice, even your identity, just to avoid standing out. It's why you laugh at jokes you don't find funny, why you nod along in conversations you quietly disagree with, why you wear the mask of agreement, not because you believe, but because you fear what will happen if you don't. At its core, this influence isn't about belief, it's about belonging. We are wired to connect, and rejection can feel like death. So we conform, not always loudly, often in small, silent betrayals of ourselves. We lower our voice when others speak louder. We mimic the tone of the room. We choose peace over truth, and in doing so, we become invisible in plain sight. This pressure isn't forced, it's absorbed. No one has to tell you to fit in. You feel it, in the pause before you speak, in the glance that checks for approval, in the tension that says, don't make it awkward. Don't be the one. The desire to belong overrides the desire to be authentic. But over time, this can leave you hollow. You forget what you think, feel, or value because you've been too busy adapting to everyone else. The fear of exclusion becomes the architect of your choices, and what once felt like survival starts to look like self-erasure. Normative social influence doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, just be like them. It's safer that way, and before you realize it, you've blended in so well, even you can't find yourself. Informational social influence. Informational social influence is the quiet surrender of your own judgment when you believe others know better. It's what makes you change your answer in a group, even if you were sure at first. It's what makes you follow the crowd when you're unsure, uncertain, or afraid of being wrong, not because you're weak, but because you're wired to trust the collective when your own knowledge feels shaky. This influence doesn't shout, it whispers, they must know something I don't. In unfamiliar situations, like a crisis, a debate, a moral dilemma, our instincts scan the room for cues. Who looks confident? Who's not hesitating? Who's already decided? And slowly, your inner compass bends toward the perceived majority. You override your gut, your reason, your lived experience in exchange for the comfort of social proof. It happens in classrooms, boardrooms, social movements. It happens in moments of fear when people look to others for how to react. A fire alarm goes off. And you wait. No one runs, so you don't. And that hesitation can be fatal, not because you didn't know better, but because no one else moved. Silence becomes guidance. Inaction becomes instruction. Informational social influence is powerful because it's rooted in survival. Alone, we are vulnerable. Together, we are safe. But sometimes, the crowd is blind. Sometimes, the group is wrong. And if you always defer to what others seem to know, you slowly lose the ability to hear yourself until your voice is just another one drowned out by the noise of conformity. Self-serving bias. Self-serving bias is the ego's favorite defense, the instinct to claim credit when things go right and shift blame when they don't. It's why we attribute our successes to skill, intelligence, or hard work, but our failures, those belong to the weather, the traffic, the team, the system, anyone but us. It's not dishonesty, it's protection, a way to guard the fragile parts of ourselves from the sting of inadequacy. This bias is deeply human. When something goes well, it feels good to say, I earned this. It builds identity, pride, purpose. But when things fall apart, that same identity feels threatened. The failure doesn't just feel like a moment. It feels like a reflection of who we are. And that's too painful to face. So we reach for excuses. We rewrite the story. We cast ourselves as the hero in success and the victim in defeat. It shows up in relationships, in careers, in everyday conversation. A partner blames stress, not themselves, for being unkind. A student credits a good grade to brilliance and a bad one to a bad teacher. A leader owns every win, but disappears during failure. And with every self-serving twist, the gap between how we see ourselves and how others see us grows wider. The tragedy of this bias isn't just that it distorts truth, it isolates us, it blocks accountability, it poisons growth, and it keeps us stuck in a version of ourselves that's more comfortable than real. Because the hardest truth to admit is that sometimes the problem isn't out there, it's us. Projection. Projection is the mind's quiet defense mechanism, the act of unconsciously casting your own emotions, flaws, or fears onto someone else, so you don't have to face them in yourself. It's the angry man who accuses others of having a temper, the unfaithful partner obsessed with jealousy, the insecure boss who labels others as inadequate. It's not manipulation, it's avoidance, a way to offload inner discomfort by rewriting reality. When your own traits feel too threatening to confront, the psyche does something cunning. It disowns them. It takes what you deny, envy, guilt, weakness, desire, and attributes it to others. It's not you who's selfish, it's them. Not you who's afraid, but everyone else is paranoid. In doing so, projection offers temporary relief. It protects the ego from crumbling under self-awareness. But that protection is costly. Projection distorts relationships. It breeds conflict out of nothing. It blinds you to your own patterns because you see them everywhere but in the mirror. You judge others harshly, not because they're wrong, but because they reflect something buried deep inside you, something unresolved, something raw. And the more you project, the more alone you become, because projection pushes people away. It makes them feel accused, misunderstood, even gaslit. They feel your unspoken war, but they can't name the battlefield. Meanwhile, you stay trapped in a cycle of blame, never touching the root. Projection isn't about others. It's a cry from within, a sign of what still hurts, what still hides, what still needs your attention, not in them, but in you. Deindividuation. Deindividuation is the moment the mask slips, not to reveal who we are, but to erase it entirely. It's what happens when people lose their sense of self in the crowd, when identity dissolves into the collective, and when morality fades beneath the weight of anonymity. It's not a transformation into someone new. It's the temporary death of accountability, of empathy, of restraint. In the shadow of the group, we stop hearing our inner voice. We stop feeling the consequences of our actions. We yell louder, push harder, take risks we'd never dream of alone. Online, it's the cruel comment left under a stranger's photo. At protests, it's peaceful intentions twisted into chaos. In mobs, it's violence ignited not by hatred, but by the absence of the self. De-individuation is seductive. It offers freedom, freedom from guilt, from judgment, from the pressure to be good. It feels like power, but it's actually escape, escape from the weight of being seen. That's why people wear masks, uniforms, usernames, anything that blurs the I into we. Because once the individual vanishes, the shadow can act without shame. It thrives in the dark corners of the internet, in the fever pitch of groupthink, in stadiums, riots, cults, and toxic communities. But it doesn't always look monstrous. Sometimes it looks like silence, watching harm unfold and doing nothing because everyone else is doing nothing too. De-individuation strips away our anchor, and when the tide of the group pulls strong enough, we forget who we were before we followed. And sometimes we don't realize how far we've drifted until the noise fades and the silence returns us to ourselves. Groupthink. Groupthink is the silent killer of truth that creeps into teams, families, communities, anywhere people crave harmony more than honesty. It's the moment a group, desperate to avoid conflict, starts to agree just to keep the peace. Dissent disappears, doubt is swallowed, and what could have been a bold, innovative conversation becomes a chorus of polite, dangerous silence. It starts small, a risky idea is proposed, and no one speaks up, not because they agree, but because speaking up might rock the boat. Challenge the leader, delay the plan, so they nod, smile, suppress their instincts, and one by one, the room becomes an echo chamber where agreement is mistaken for wisdom. Groupthink thrives in environments where conformity is rewarded and questioning is punished, where the need to belong outweighs the need to be right. It's why bad policies pass, why flawed products are launched, why history holds so many avoidable disasters backed by teams of smart, well-meaning people who simply didn't want to be the one who said no. Fear is its fuel, fear of being labeled difficult, disloyal, or negative. So people shrink, they rationalize, they silence the voice that whispers, "This doesn't feel right." And when it all falls apart, everyone wonders how no one saw it coming, when in truth, everyone did. They just didn't feel safe enough to speak. Groupthink doesn't ask you to betray your values overnight. It asks you to compromise them quietly, collectively, until no one remembers what truth even looked like. And by the time someone finally dares to say it aloud, it's often too late. Chameleon Effect. The Chameleon Effect is the subtle, unconscious dance we do to belong, the way we mirror others' gestures, tone, expressions, and energy without even realizing it. It's human mimicry, not for deception, but for connection. When we feel a sense of rapport, we naturally start to reflect the person in front of us, and when they see us doing it, even if they don't notice, they feel understood, safe, alike. It begins in milliseconds, a crossed leg, a shared laugh, a mirrored sigh. You lean forward because they leaned forward. You nod more because they do. Your voice softens when theirs does. It's not performance, it's instinct, a biological bonding mechanism rooted in our evolution. In tribes, in families, in early childhood, we learn survival through synchrony. The more we blend, the more we belong. But the Chameleon Effect doesn't just create comfort, it creates influence. When you reflect someone's rhythm, their guard lowers, their trust rises. People like those who feel familiar, and nothing feels more familiar than a reflection of ourselves. That's why skilled negotiators, therapists, and leaders often do this effortlessly, and why manipulators can weaponize it. Still, most of the time, it's innocent. It's the reason best friends start to share phrases or couples begin to walk in step. It's a quiet love language of similarity. But there's a risk too. Blend too much and you forget your own color. Adapt too often and you lose the shape of your own voice. The Chameleon Effect connects us, but in the deepest corners of it, we must ask, are we mirroring to be close or to disappear? Fear of missing out, FOMO. Fear of missing out, or FOMO, is the ache in your chest when you see others living a life that looks brighter, fuller, more exciting than yours. It's the scroll through a highlight reel of parties you weren't invited to, milestones you haven't reached, joy you weren't a part of. It's not envy exactly, it's the haunting belief that you are being left behind, that life is happening without you. FOMO isn't just a modern phenomenon, it's an ancient survival instinct. We evolved in tribes where exclusion meant danger, rejection could mean death, so the fear of missing out was once the fear of being forgotten, of losing connection, of slipping into irrelevance. Today it shows up in subtler, more tormenting ways. You see friends traveling, falling in love, building careers, and instead of feeling happy for them, you feel hollow, like you're behind, like something's wrong with you. It whispers that whatever you're doing right now isn't enough, that there's something better, somewhere else, with someone else, and you're just not part of it. It steals your ability to be present. It turns quiet moments into restlessness, achievements into comparisons. It fuels impulsive decisions, overcommitment, addiction to validation, because anything feels better than the sting of being left out. But FOMO isn't about the event. It's about the fear that you don't matter, that you don't belong, that you're not where you're supposed to be. And as long as you chase the illusion that everyone else is happier, you'll miss the life that's right in front of you, aching to be enough, if only you'd look. Reciprocity Principle. The Reciprocity Principle is one of the oldest, most deeply embedded instincts in human nature. The unspoken rule that if someone gives to you, you must give something back. It's not just etiquette, it's survival, a sacred code written into our biology. Kindness must be returned, favors must be repaid, balance must be restored. And when it isn't, something inside us burns. It starts small. A stranger holds the door, and you feel the need to say thank you. A friend buys you lunch, and next time you reach for the check. A salesperson gives you a free sample, and suddenly you feel a pull, an obligation to consider the purchase. It's not rational, it's reflexive, an emotional contract signed the moment you receive. This principle builds communities. It strengthens relationships. It turns isolated individuals into connected allies, but it also opens a doorway to influence and even manipulation, because once someone gives you something, no matter how small, it activates a need to even the scales, and that need can be guided, twisted, used. Marketers know it, leaders use it, con artists thrive on it. The more unexpected the kindness, the deeper the debt feels, and the less aware you are of the exchange, the more power it holds over you. But reciprocity is not always about fairness. Sometimes we give back more than we receive just to escape the discomfort of imbalance, because to not return a favor feels wrong, feels guilty, feels like breaking an ancient pact. So we give, not because we want to, but because we must. And that makes reciprocity one of the most generous and most dangerous forces in human connection. Locus of Control. Locus of control is the invisible dial that determines how you explain the events in your life, whether you believe the world happens to you or you shape what happens in it. It's not just a mindset, it's the lens that colors your entire reality. With an internal locus, you believe you have agency. With an external one, you feel at the mercy of luck, fate, or other people's choices, and that difference can shape the course of a life. If your locus of control points inward, setbacks feel like challenges to overcome. You take responsibility, even when it hurts. You believe your actions matter, and so you act. But if your locus points outward, every obstacle becomes proof that you're powerless. That effort is pointless. That life just decides things without you. You wait. You blame. You break under the weight of things you think you cannot change. Neither side is all good or bad. Too much internal control can breed guilt and burnout. Too much external can lead to helplessness, even despair. But where your locus leans often begins in childhood, how you were praised, punished, or protected. Were you taught that your voice mattered or that life would always decide for you? The danger lies in not realizing where your dial is set, because once you believe you have no control, you stop looking for the door. You don't even reach for the handle, and slowly you shrink your life to fit inside the cage of your own learned helplessness, never knowing the lock was never closed. Negativity bias. Negativity bias is the heavy weight our minds give to pain over pleasure, threats over safety, criticism over praise. It's why a single harsh comment can echo louder than 100 kind ones. Why you remember the one person who hurt you, long after forgetting the dozens who helped. It's not weakness, it's evolution. Your brain was built to keep you alive, not happy, and so it clings to danger, to failure, to anything that once hurt you, because forgetting could cost you everything. This bias shows up in your thoughts, your relationships, your memories. A good day ruined by one sharp word, a beautiful moment dimmed by a single anxious thought. You replay arguments, not compliments. You brace for rejection, even when love is in front of you. The mind scans for what's wrong, even when everything seems right. It's a survival reflex, once essential. In the wild, noticing what might kill you mattered more than enjoying what made you smile. But in a modern world, this reflex becomes poison. It corrodes joy. It turns small problems into consuming storms. It blinds you to your growth, your strength, your blessings, because the pain shouts louder. And the worst part? The bias feels true. Negative experiences sink deeper into memory. Negative emotions feel more convincing, but they are not the full story. They're just louder. Negativity bias doesn't just distort how you see the world. It distorts how you see yourself. And unless you fight to remember the light, you'll always feel like you're standing in the dark, even when you're not. Framing effect. The framing effect is the psychological twist that shows how something is said can matter more than what is said. It's not the facts that sway us, it's the frame they're placed in. Tell someone a procedure has a 90% success rate, and they'll feel safe. Tell them it has a 10% failure rate, and fear creeps in. The numbers are the same, but the reaction isn't, because our minds don't deal in numbers, they deal in meaning. This effect is powerful because it slips past logic and speaks straight to emotion. It plays on instinct, on the story we build around what we hear. A loss sounds worse than a missed gain. A negative word lingers longer than its positive counterpart. Deadly virus hits harder than rare illness. Protect your family sparks action more than avoid risk. The frame wraps around the message like a lens, and that lens decides whether we feel hope, fear, urgency, or indifference. Marketers use it. Politicians thrive on it. News headlines weaponize it. But it's not just out there. It's inside your own mind. You frame your memories, your setbacks, your identity. You decide whether a failure is the end or the beginning, whether solitude is loneliness or freedom, whether your life is half empty or half alive. The framing effect reveals that reality is never delivered raw. It's always shaped, always colored, always interpreted. And in a world of constant messaging, the danger is this. The more you believe the frame, the less you question the picture inside it. Confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the invisible filter that shapes how you see the world, not based on truth, but on what you want to be true. It's the quiet compulsion to seek out, believe, and remember only the evidence that supports your existing beliefs, while ignoring or dismissing anything that challenges them. It feels like clarity, it feels like certainty, but it's a trap, a comforting lie that keeps you blind. Your brain craves consistency. It wants your worldview to make sense, to feel stable. So when new information comes in, it's not evaluated fairly. it's interrogated. If it agrees with you, you embrace it without question. If it doesn't, you poke holes in it. You question the source. You call it biased. And in doing so, you protect not the truth, but your pride. This bias fuels division. It builds echo chambers where every voice sounds like yours, where disagreement feels like an attack, and where the more you learn, the more rigid you become. It keeps you loyal to broken beliefs, harmful assumptions, and outdated identities, because changing your mind would mean admitting you were wrong. But confirmation bias doesn't just distort how you see others, it distorts how you see yourself. You overlook your own flaws, justify your worst behavior, and cherry-pick moments that fit your chosen narrative. And the scariest part is this: the smarter you are, the better you become at defending the lies you tell yourself. Truth doesn't stand a chance against a mind that's already made up, unless you're brave enough to ask, what if I'm wrong? Availability heuristic. The availability heuristic is the brain's lazy shortcut, the instinct to judge how likely or true something is based on how easily we can recall it. It's why you fear plane crashes more than car accidents, even though the latter is far more deadly. Why you think crime is surging after watching one dramatic news report. Why you overestimate danger, underestimate odds, and mistake vivid memories for reality. It works like this. If something comes to mind quickly, your brain assumes it must be common, important, or urgent. The images are fresh, the emotion is strong, and that immediacy tricks your rational mind. You don't look at data. You don't ask, is this typical? You think, I just saw it. It must be happening all the time. The availability heuristic feeds off intensity. A shocking story sticks longer than a quiet truth. The more dramatic the event, the more space it takes up in your memory, and the more weight it carries in your judgment. That's why the media doesn't need to lie to distort your perception. It just needs to keep feeding you extremes. Your fear, your bias, your outrage will fill in the rest. But this heuristic doesn't just warp how you see the world. It changes how you live. You avoid rare threats and ignore real ones. You become hyper-aware of dangers that rarely happen, while blind to risks hiding in routine. You plan for the unlikely and miss the inevitable, because when memory becomes the measure of truth, your life becomes a reflection of the loudest story, not the truest one. Overjustification Effect. The overjustification effect is the subtle way motivation dies, not with punishment, but with praise. It's when something you once loved to do, freely, joyfully, for its own sake, starts to feel like an obligation the moment you're rewarded for it. The magic fades, the fire dims, and without realizing it, you stop doing it for you. At first, it feels harmless. You draw for fun, and someone offers to pay you. You help out of kindness, and suddenly there's a prize. You write, you play, you show up, because you want to. But then the reward arrives. The money, the approval, the external validation, and what was once play becomes work. Passion becomes performance. The joy gets buried beneath expectation. This shift is so quiet, so seductive, that most people never notice. They only feel the weight, the burnout, the confusion when something that once lit them up now feels heavy and dull. The overjustification effect doesn't just steal motivation, it steals identity. Because when you stop doing things out of love and start doing them for reward, you forget why you began. It happens to artists, to athletes, to students, to children. A pure act becomes a transaction, and the soul of it gets lost in the process. You might keep going through the motions, but your heart isn't in it. Not anymore. To feel truly alive, we need more than incentive. We need meaning. And the moment your reason for doing something comes from outside yourself, you risk losing the one thing that made it beautiful, that it was yours. Authority bias. Authority bias is the unconscious urge to trust, obey, and follow those we see as powerful, even when our instincts tell us something's wrong. It's the reason we defer to the man in the lab coat, the executive in the corner office, the loudest voice in the room. Something deep inside whispers, they must know better, and that whisper can drown out reason, gut feeling, even morality. From childhood, we're taught to respect authority, to listen to parents, teachers, leaders. That conditioning runs so deep that as adults, we carry it into every setting. When someone appears confident, credentialed, or in control, we're more likely to believe them. We silence our doubts. We hesitate to question. We surrender critical thinking, not because we're weak, but because we're human. Because centuries of survival have taught us that challenging the wrong leader can cost everything. This bias is how dangerous ideas get a free pass, how corrupt systems stay protected, how ordinary people commit unthinkable acts, believing I was just following orders. It's why cults flourish, why whistleblowers are rare, why the truth sometimes feels quieter than a uniform voice speaking with certainty. Authority bias isn't just about fear, it's about comfort. Letting someone else decide feels safer than stepping into uncertainty. It relieves us of responsibility, of guilt, of choice. But that relief is dangerous because not every leader deserves your trust, and not every expert has your best interest in mind. If you always wait for someone else to speak first, you risk becoming an echo in someone else's story, when your own voice was the one that needed to be heard. Optimism bias. Optimism bias is the gentle lie your mind tells you to soften life's edges, the belief that things will work out better for you than they will for others. It's why you underestimate the risk of heartbreak, illness, failure, or loss. Why you believe you won't be the one who gets sick, who loses the job, who ends up alone. It's not arrogance, it's hope disguised as logic, a quiet promise your brain whispers to protect you from fear. This bias doesn't come from ignorance. It comes from the deep human need to believe in a future worth waking up for. Without it, we'd freeze in the face of uncertainty. We'd never take chances, never dream, never love again after losing. Optimism. Bias gives us courage, but it also leaves us vulnerable, because when reality breaks through that hopeful illusion, it hurts more than we expect. We're not prepared. We thought we were the exception. It's why people skip health warnings, why they put off saving money, why they trust someone they shouldn't, because deep down they think it won't happen to me. And when it does, the shock cuts twice, once from the pain and once from the betrayal of hope. Optimism. Bias can keep you moving forward, but it can also keep you unprepared. It can inspire dreams and deny danger. It makes you feel protected until life reminds you that hope is not immunity. It's faith. Fragile, powerful, necessary, but it's not always right. And sometimes the truth doesn't wait for you to be ready. Pygmalion Effect. The Pygmalion Effect is the powerful, invisible force that shapes people not by what they are, but by what others believe they can become. When someone expects greatness from you, something inside you begins to rise, not always out of confidence, but out of a deep, almost desperate desire to live up to the vision someone has placed on your shoulders. And slowly, belief becomes reality. It begins with expectation. A teacher thinks a student is gifted. A coach sees potential. A manager spots leadership. They treat that person differently, give more attention, more feedback, more chances. And the person, sensing belief, performs better. Not because they were always destined for success, but because someone believed they were. This effect doesn't just shape performance, it shapes identity. When the world sees you as capable, smart, worthy, you start to see yourself that way too. You speak with more confidence, take more risks, bounce back faster. The reflection you see in others' eyes becomes the mirror that changes how you move through the world. But the Pygmalion Effect has a cruel twin, the Golem Effect. When expectations are low, so is the outcome. When people expect failure, they give less effort, less faith, less warmth. and the person receiving that message begins to shrink, not because they lack potential, but because they were never given the space to grow. The Pygmalion Effect reveals this haunting truth. People often become what the world tells them they are, and sometimes the most life-changing thing you can give someone isn't a lesson or a gift, but a belief they can carry long after you're gone. Golem Effect. The Golem Effect is the dark side of expectation, the invisible weight people carry when others believe they will fail. It's the self-fulfilling prophecy that quietly crushes potential, not with cruelty, but with disbelief. When teachers, parents, leaders, or peers expect little from someone, that expectation seeps into how they're treated. Less encouragement, less trust, less opportunity, and slowly that person begins to shrink into the space they've been given. It starts subtly. A student gets overlooked because they seem average. A new employee isn't challenged because no one believes in their growth. A child is spoken to with impatience, as if they're destined to disappoint. The Golem Effect takes root in these quiet moments of dismissal, and soon the message becomes internalized. I am not enough. I'm not meant to succeed. Why even try? This belief doesn't come from within. It's planted, nurtured by every sigh, every doubt, every lowered bar. And over time, it becomes reality, not because the person lacked talent or worth, but because they were never given a chance to believe they had it. What makes the Golem Effect so painful is that it's often unspoken. No one says you'll fail. They just act like it. And that silent judgment becomes louder than words. It rewrites confidence. It shapes identity. The tragedy isn't just the wasted potential. It's that the failure was never truly theirs. It was given to them, and they carried it as if it were their own. Placebo Effect. The placebo effect is one of the most astonishing demonstrations of how powerful the human mind truly is. Proof that belief alone can trigger real, physical change. It's the body responding to a sugar pill as if it were medicine, its pain subsiding, symptoms vanishing, healing accelerating, not because of the treatment, but because you believed in it. This isn't imagination, it's biology. The brain, convinced that healing is underway, begins to release chemicals, endorphins, dopamine, immune boosters that mirror the effects of real drugs. The expectation of relief becomes the mechanism for relief. The body doesn't wait for proof. It trusts your belief and acts accordingly. The placebo effect doesn't just happen in clinical trials. It happens in everyday life. You take a vitamin and feel more energized before it even kicks in. You believe a ritual brings calm, and it does. A loved one says, "You're going to be okay," and your heart slows, your breathing deepens. Nothing changed except your mind, and that changed everything. But this effect holds a bittersweet truth. If hope can heal, hopelessness can harm. The mind is not neutral. It leans in the direction you point it, and if belief can spark recovery, disbelief can deepen pain. That's the quiet power of suggestion, of stories we accept as real. The placebo effect reminds us that we are not just flesh and bone, we are belief, perception, and meaning. The mind listens not only to what's real, but to what feels real, and sometimes that illusion can heal more than any medicine ever could. Nocebo Effect. The nocebo effect is the terrifying power of belief turned inward, the phenomenon where expecting something to harm you actually makes it do harm, even when it shouldn't. It's the shadow twin of the placebo effect, but instead of healing, it wounds. A harmless pill creates side effects because you feared it would. A benign comment makes you spiral because you believed it meant something cruel. The mind becomes the architect of its own suffering, and the body follows. This isn't imagination, it's physiology. When you believe you're under threat, your body responds as if it's true. Heart rate spikes, muscles tighten, pain intensifies, immune systems weaken. The brain floods your system with stress, fear, and panic, and slowly, belief becomes biology. Doctors see it when patients react to sugar pills with nausea or fatigue because they were warned of side effects. People experience illness from news, from labels, from diagnoses they barely understand. Words become weapons, not because they're toxic, but because they feel toxic. The expectation of harm manifests as real pain, real illness, real decline. What makes the nocebo effect so haunting is its invisibility. You don't know it's happening. You just feel worse and worse and worse, and no one can explain why. But deep beneath the surface, it's not your body breaking down. It's your belief taking over. This effect reminds us that fear, once internalized, has teeth, that doubt, once planted, can rot everything, and that sometimes what hurts us most isn't the thing itself, but the story we tell ourselves about it. Zeigarnik Effect. The Zeigarnik Effect is the mind's restless grip on what's unfinished, the reason an incomplete task echoes louder in your thoughts than one that's already done. It's the mental itch that refuses to fade, the open loop that nags you during dinner, in the shower, while trying to sleep. Your brain remembers what's unresolved, and it won't let go until it closes the loop. This effect was first noticed by psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, who saw that waiters could remember orders they hadn't delivered, but forgot them soon after the meal was complete. The mind, it turns out, keeps a spotlight on what still needs doing. It holds space for the undone, and that space fills with tension. It's why you replay the conversation you didn't finish, why the email you didn't send stays louder in your head than the 20 you already wrote, why unfinished dreams haunt you longer than the ones you outgrew. The Zeigarnik Effect isn't just about memory, it's about mental energy. Unfinished business drains you. It splits your focus. It lingers. But that tension can be a gift. It drives closure, progress, resolution. It pushes you to finish, not for perfection, but for peace. Yet it can also become a trap. You start things and feel chained to them, even when they no longer serve you. You carry guilt, pressure, invisible weight, simply because something's not complete. The mind wants completion, but life is full of open loops, and sometimes the hardest part is learning not just to finish, but to forgive what stays unfinished, to find peace not in perfection, but in permission to let go. Serial Position Effect. The serial position effect is the mind's selective memory trick, where what comes first and last in an experience tends to stick, while everything in the middle fades into fog. It's why you remember the first words someone said to you and the way they said goodbye, but forget the conversations in between. It's why the beginning and the ending of a movie linger, even when the middle felt like a blur. Your brain doesn't treat all moments equally. It remembers the entry and the exit, because those feel like meaning. This effect splits into two parts, the primacy effect and the recency effect. What comes first carves the foundation. It sets the tone. It's your brain's first impression, and it burns in deeper. What comes last rides on immediacy, still fresh, still echoing, still loud. But the middle, it slips through the cracks, often forgotten, even if it mattered most. This psychological pattern isn't just about memory, it shapes emotion too. We remember how someone made us feel when we first met them. We carry the aftertaste of a final conversation. A relationship might have had years of love, but if it ended in betrayal, that's what stays. A job could have been fulfilling for months, but if the exit was brutal, the whole experience feels bitter. The serial position effect reveals how much weight we give to beginnings and endings, and how easily that weight can distort truth. Sometimes, it's not the full story we carry with us. It's just the first and final page, and that's the story we remember as real. Imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is the silent belief that you don't belong where you are, that your achievements are accidents, your success a fluke, your confidence a mask slipping at the edges. It's the voice that whispers, "You're a fraud. You fooled them all, and one day they'll see it." No matter how much you've done, how far you've come, It never feels like enough because deep down, you don't feel like you are enough. It doesn't matter how smart, accomplished, or respected you are. Imposter syndrome doesn't care. It thrives in high performers, the sensitive, the perfectionists, the ones who set the bar so high that even when they clear it, they move it again. Every success becomes something to explain away. Luck, timing, kind people. Nothing is ever credited to your own worth. And when praise comes, it feels undeserved, almost painful to hear. This syndrome steals joy in silence. It makes you play small in rooms you've earned the right to stand in. It keeps you quiet when your voice could lead, when your ideas could shift the room. And what's worse, you assume you're the only one who feels this way, while others are likely looking at you and thinking the same of themselves. Imposter syndrome doesn't reflect truth. It reflects fear, the fear of being seen and found wanting. But that fear is a liar. It never shows the whole picture. It leaves out the nights you pushed through, the hours you gave, the failures you turned into growth. You didn't get lucky. You got here because you showed up, even when you were scared, even when the voice said you didn't belong. And that's exactly why you do. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is the blueprint of the human soul laid bare, a layered map of what drives us, what sustains us, and what we desperately crave when the world falls apart. It begins with the most basic of needs: survival, food, water, shelter, safety, and from there it rises through connection, esteem, purpose, towards something sacred, self-actualization. At the bottom, we are fragile, hungry bodies, restless hearts. In this state, nothing else matters. Dreams don't live in an empty stomach. Confidence doesn't grow in fear, so the mind anchors itself in survival. And when that need is met, it climbs. Next comes the hunger to belong, to love and be loved, to feel seen, accepted, part of something. Without this, we ache in silence. Even if all our physical needs are met, we are not wired for solitude. We are wired for each other. And when we find connection, we reach higher still. Esteem follows. We begin to ask, do I matter? Am I respected? Do I respect myself? And when that answer is yes, something within us stirs, a quiet voice that says, there's more. And that's where the final level calls, the need to become all that we are capable of becoming, not just to survive, not just to succeed, but to create, to grow, to live with purpose. But if even one layer cracks, everything above it trembles, because no one chases greatness when they're drowning in loneliness or fear. Maslow's pyramid is not just a theory, it's a mirror, and it reflects how every human, no matter how different, is climbing the same invisible mountain. Liking bias. Liking bias is the quiet filter that distorts how we see people, not based on truth, but on how much we like them. When we're drawn to someone by charm, warmth, humor, attractiveness, we unconsciously assign them positive traits they may not have earned. We think they're smarter, more honest, more capable. We give them the benefit of the doubt. We defend them when they falter. We forgive what we'd condemn in others, all because we like them. This bias isn't rational. It's emotional. It kicks in fast, often within seconds. You meet someone and they smile just right, mirror your energy, say your name with care, and suddenly they become magnetic. And once that positive impression forms, it's hard to shake. Their mistakes are softened. Their words carry more weight. Their flaws become quirks. Advertisers exploit this constantly, pairing their brands with likable celebrities, friendly voices, or familiar faces. Leaders, influencers, even manipulators use it too, because when someone likes you, they stop questioning you. They start believing you, and that trust can be intoxicating. But liking bias goes deeper than influence. It shapes relationships, opportunities, justice. Two people do the same thing, but if we like one more, our judgment changes. One gets empathy, the other consequences. and often we don't even notice. The danger of liking bias isn't just misplaced trust, it's distorted reality. It makes us blind to faults, and worse, deaf to the truth when it comes from someone we don't feel connected to, because when bias leads, fairness fades, and what we believe becomes less about what's real and more about who we simply prefer. Scarcity principle. The scarcity principle is the raw, primal response that makes us want something more simply because it's rare, limited, or about to disappear. It hijacks the rational mind, whispering, if I don't get it now, I'll lose it forever. And suddenly, the thing itself doesn't even matter. It's the threat of absence that makes us crave it. Scarcity plays on survival instincts. In the wild, what was scarce was precious: food, shelter, protection. Those who hesitated didn't last. That urgency, once meant to keep us alive, now pulls us into obsession over sold-out shoes, countdown timers, exclusive offers, or the person who just became emotionally unavailable. We don't always desire what's valuable. We desire what feels about to vanish. This principle is used on us every day. Marketers flood our screens with phrases like limited edition, only 3 left, ends tonight. And it works, not because we need the thing, but because the idea of missing out feels unbearable. Scarcity ignites panic. Panic makes us impulsive, and in that rush, we confuse urgency with importance. But it's not just objects. We chase people who pull away, opportunities we can't quite reach. We mistake emotional distance for depth. We tell ourselves that if something is rare, it must be worth more. So we run toward closed doors, ignoring the ones wide open, because the chase itself becomes the desire. The scarcity principle doesn't just sell products, it sells illusions that what's slipping through our fingers was meant for us, that loss equals value, and that urgency is always a reason to act, when sometimes it's just a trick of the light. Peak end rule. The peak end rule is the strange way your mind remembers experiences, not by how long they lasted or how consistent they were, but by 2 moments, the peak and the end, the most intense point and the final feeling. Everything in between fades into a blur. What stays is the sharpest high, the deepest low, or the last emotional note, and those moments shape your entire memory of the event. It's why a long, boring movie with an unforgettable ending feels amazing in hindsight, why a painful procedure, if it ends gently, doesn't haunt you as badly, why a relationship full of ups and downs is remembered mostly for one perfect night or one final fight. Your brain doesn't archive the full timeline. It edits, it distills, it keeps what moved you and discards the rest. This rule explains why some of your most cherished memories weren't perfect from start to finish, but they had a moment, a spark, a crescendo that stayed. It also explains why trauma clings so tightly, because the most intense pain is the memory. The ending is the imprint. Marketers, artists, doctors, teachers, they all use the peak end rule, whether they realize it or not. They craft moments. They end strong because they know that's what you'll carry with you. Not the full picture, just the emotional spikes. But this rule doesn't just affect how we remember the past. It shapes what we choose in the future. We chase experiences we barely enjoyed just because they ended well, or avoid ones that were mostly good because the ending hurt. Memory isn't fair. It's emotional, and it doesn't ask what was true. It asks what you felt the most. Contrast effect. The contrast effect is the psychological illusion that changes how we see things, not based on what they are, but based on what we saw just before. It's the reason someone feels stunning after we've looked at something plain, or underwhelming after we've seen brilliance. It's why a small win feels enormous after failure, and why an average day feels empty after ecstasy. We don't judge things in isolation. We judge them in comparison. This effect is subtle but powerful. Walk into a cold room after standing in the sun, and it feels freezing. That same room would feel warm if you came from the snow. It's the same environment, the same truth, but Your perception has shifted, not because the thing changed, but because your reference point did. It's the tool of marketers who show you the $2,000 suit first, so the $800 one feels like a deal. It's how manipulative partners seem kind after treating you cruelly, because the cruelty sets the bar so low. It's why average can feel like failure after success, and like hope after despair. The contrast effect doesn't just influence your decisions, it shapes your emotions. It builds expectations that reality can't meet. It keeps you swinging between extremes, always chasing highs that were never meant to be the standard. And sometimes it blinds you to what something truly is because you're too focused on what it's not. In the end, you're not always reacting to the moment. You're reacting to the moment before it. And that split-second shift in perspective can turn something beautiful into disappointment, or something simple into magic. Social loafing. Social loafing is the quiet shrinking of effort that happens when we work in a group. The invisible pull to do less, care less, give less, simply because responsibility is shared. It's the voice that says, someone else will pick up the slack, no one will notice, or why try harder when it won't make a difference? And slowly, subtly, we start to disappear into the crowd. This effect doesn't come from laziness, it comes from disconnection. When individual effort blends into collective results, our motivation blurs, the recognition fades, the pressure dissolves, and without accountability, even the most capable people start to drift. Work becomes diluted, passion dims, ownership vanishes. It happens in classrooms, teams, offices, committees, anywhere the spotlight is wide and the consequences are vague. One person zones out during a group project, another stops volunteering ideas in a brainstorming session. No one wants to carry more than their share, but in the end, someone always does. Or worse, no one does enough, and the whole thing crumbles. Social loafing reveals something uncomfortable. We often do more when we're alone, when the credit is ours, when the failure would be ours too. In groups, we sometimes hide, not just from effort, but from fear. Fear of being judged, of standing out, of doing more than what's required, only to be met with silence. But groups don't thrive because of numbers. They thrive because of engagement. And when everyone thinks someone else will step up, no one does. The cost of fading into the group is high, because the more people pull back, the less anyone rises, until the room is full, but the energy is gone. Learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is the heartbreaking belief that no matter what you do, nothing will change, so you stop trying altogether. It's not laziness, it's not weakness, it's the slow erosion of hope after too many failures, too many rejections, too many times life knocked you down and didn't let you up. It's the dog that stops trying to escape the cage, even when the door is open. It's the person who stays in the pain because they've forgotten what power feels like. This mindset forms in moments of powerlessness. Maybe you tried to speak and no one listened. Maybe you fought for love and were left anyway. Maybe you gave everything and it still wasn't enough. And somewhere in the middle of that heartbreak, something inside you whispered, "Why bother?" And you listened. Over time, this becomes a way of life. You don't take chances. You don't ask for more. You avoid new paths, not because you're content, but because you've been taught that effort equals disappointment. Even when freedom is within reach, fear says, don't risk the pain again. So you stay, you shrink, you survive. The tragedy of learned helplessness is that it becomes self-fulfilling. You stop acting, so nothing changes. Nothing changes, so you feel even more stuck. But what you forget, what the pain tries to hide, is that the door might already be open, that the world hasn't stopped offering chances, that strength doesn't mean never falling. It means daring to stand up one more time, even when your past screams that it's useless. Self-fulfilling prophecy. A self-fulfilling prophecy is a belief that quietly shapes reality, not because it's true, but because you believe it's true. It starts as a thought. I'll fail. I'm not good enough. This won't work. And that thought changes how you act, how much effort you give, how open you are to opportunity, how deeply you trust yourself. Bit by bit, your belief bends your behavior, and eventually, the fear you carried becomes the truth you live. It works in both directions. Think you're going to succeed? You stand taller, you try harder, you take risks. People respond to that energy. Doors open, momentum builds, and suddenly, what you believe becomes real. But if you expect rejection, you shrink, you hold back, you stop asking, trying, reaching, and life echoes your withdrawal with silence. The self-fulfilling prophecy doesn't care if your belief is positive or negative. It simply amplifies whatever you feed it. If you think people won't like you, you might avoid eye contact, stay quiet, seem distant, and when they don't engage, you say, "See, I was right," but you weren't. You just created the outcome you feared. This isn't magic, it's psychology. People respond to the energy you bring. You teach them how to treat you, and your beliefs are the script from which you act, speak, and interpret the world. Change the belief, and everything else begins to shift. But the most haunting part? Sometimes we sabotage ourselves just to prove we were right, because being right feels safer than being hopeful, even if it means losing everything hope might have brought. Temporal discounting. Temporal discounting is the inner tug-of-war between now and later, the irrational preference for a small reward today over a greater one tomorrow. It's why we eat the cake, skip the workout, spend the money, hit snooze. It's not because we don't know better, it's because the brain is wired to crave immediacy, even if it steals from our future. The further away a reward is, the less value we assign to it. Even if the future payoff is bigger, brighter, better, if it's not here now, it doesn't feel real. Meanwhile, the present whispers seduction. You deserve this now. You can start tomorrow, just this once. And just like that, long-term goals fade into background noise. Temporal discounting isn't just a flaw in judgment, it's a survival instinct. For our ancestors, the future wasn't guaranteed. Tomorrow could mean hunger, danger, death. So, taking the fruit now made more sense than waiting for a bigger harvest later. But in a modern world where the biggest rewards require patience, health, wealth, growth, peace, this instinct becomes a trap. It fuels addiction, procrastination, impulsive decisions. It delays dreams. It sabotages the version of ourselves we long to become. And each time we choose the fleeting comfort of now over the quiet victory of later, we trade long-term fulfillment for a moment that's gone before we even finish enjoying it. The pain isn't just in what we lose, it's in knowing we chose it, not out of ignorance, but out of impulse. And the hardest part? The future does arrive, and it always asks the same question: was it worth it? Illusion of transparency. The illusion of transparency is the haunting belief that everyone can see straight through you, that your fear is obvious, your insecurities are exposed, your thoughts are leaking out for the world to read. It's the reason your voice shakes and you assume everyone noticed, the reason you stumble on a word and feel like the room heard your shame. It's the lie your anxiety tells you. They know, they're judging, you're failing, but in truth, they probably didn't even notice. This illusion stems from how vividly you feel your inner world. Your heart races, your hands sweat, your mind spirals. To you, it feels enormous, so it must look enormous, but it doesn't. Most people are too lost in their own minds to decode yours. Your discomfort is not a spotlight, it's a flicker, a moment, one most people will never see. The illusion of transparency doesn't just magnify embarrassment, it silences you. It keeps you from speaking up, asking the question, sharing your idea, stepping into the moment. You think you're being watched, but you're being imagined, judged by a voice that lives in your head, not theirs. This illusion feeds fear. It convinces you that vulnerability is exposure, that mistakes are humiliation, that silence is safer. But the truth is, people don't see your storm unless you show it to them. And more often than not, when they do, what they see isn't weakness, it's humanity. And that's the part they're most likely to understand. Belief perseverance. Belief perseverance is the stubborn flame that keeps burning even after the truth has arrived. Our refusal to let go of a belief, no matter how much evidence says we should. It's what keeps people loyal to disproven ideas, outdated assumptions, and personal stories that no longer serve them. Not because they're blind, but because they're human. Because changing a belief doesn't just rewrite thoughts, it rewrites identity. When we hold a belief, especially one tied to our values, our past, or our sense of control, it becomes part of us. It roots itself in memory, emotion, pride, and when something threatens that belief, a fact, a figure, a revelation, we don't thank it for enlightening us. We resist, we justify, we double down, because letting go would mean admitting we were wrong, that we were misled, that we lived by a lie. Belief perseverance is why people defend toxic relationships, why they cling to political ideologies that harm them, why they tell themselves, I'm not good enough, even after years of growth. The belief outlives the evidence. It becomes armor, and sometimes a prison. It's not logic we protect, it's the self. To change a belief is to break open the world and risk not knowing who we are anymore. That's terrifying. So we hold on tighter, even as truth knocks louder. The tragedy? Beliefs don't just shape opinions, they shape choices, lives, futures, and when you won't let a belief die, you may bury part of yourself with it, not because it's right, but because it's familiar, because the truth sometimes is lonelier than the lie. Choice overload. Choice overload is the modern-day paralysis of freedom, the overwhelming anxiety that creeps in when you're faced with too many options. It sounds like abundance, like luxury, but instead of empowerment, it breeds doubt, hesitation, and a crushing fear of making the wrong choice. It's not just a decision, it's a test of identity. What you pick feels like a reflection of who you are, and suddenly, the stakes feel too high. You stand in the cereal aisle, scrolling through job listings, swiping through endless faces on a dating app, and instead of feeling excited, you feel stuck. Every option is a door, but choosing one means closing the rest. What if there's something better? What if you regret it? What if you missed the perfect one because you acted too soon? The more options you have, the harder it becomes to feel satisfied with any of them, because no matter what you choose, there's always the ghost of the road not taken. You compare your decision not just to what is, but to what could have been, and that imagined ideal often wins, leaving you restless, second-guessing, and quietly miserable. Choice overload doesn't just exhaust you, it erodes your confidence. You don't trust your instincts anymore. You delay, you avoid, you settle for nothing, not because nothing is good enough, but because everything might be. And in chasing the illusion of a perfect decision, you risk making none at all. Because sometimes freedom doesn't look like more doors. It looks like the courage to walk through just one and close it behind you. Endowment effect. The endowment effect is the irrational bond we form with anything we believe is ours, the instant inflation of value that happens the moment ownership begins. It's why a mug you just received feels worth more than one on a shelf, why a car you've driven for years seems priceless, even if it's breaking down, why letting go feels like losing a part of yourself, even when logic says you should. Once something becomes yours, your brain rewires how you see it. It's no longer just an object or opportunity. It's a piece of identity, a comfort, a symbol. You didn't just buy it. You invested emotion, memory, presence. That sweater, it's the one you wore the day everything changed. That relationship, it's familiar, even if it's failing. That belief, it shaped how you saw the world. The endowment effect clouds judgment. It makes us overvalue what we have and undervalue what we don't. It keeps garages full of junk, drawers full of maybe someday, hearts full of people we should have let go. It convinces us that loss is worse than possibility, that change is danger, and that moving on is betrayal. But the thing we often miss is this: ownership isn't always a gift. It can be a cage. Just because something is yours doesn't mean it's worth keeping. And sometimes the hardest truth is realizing that the only thing tying you to something is the story you've told yourself about what it means to let it go. Law of effect. The law of effect is the foundational truth of behavior, that actions followed by reward are likely to be repeated, and those followed by punishment are likely to be avoided. It's simple, uncomplicated, but beneath that simplicity lies the quiet mechanism that shapes every habit, every fear, every pattern you carry into adulthood. It begins in childhood. A smile earns praise. You smile more. A mistake brings shame. You start to hide. Over time, your brain forms associations, like grooves in a record. Pleasure means do that again. Pain means never again. And without realizing it, you begin to mold your identity around the consequences you've received. Not always fair, not always conscious, but always felt. The law of effect doesn't just teach, it conditions. It wires your reflexes. Why do you check your phone 100 times a day? Because sometimes, just enough times, you get a message, a like, a spark. That intermittent reward, it's behavioral glue. Why do you avoid difficult conversations? Because somewhere in your past, they led to rejection or rage. So now, silence feels safer than truth. This law drives addiction, ambition, procrastination, perfectionism. It builds your routines, your triggers, your coping mechanisms, not through reason, but through repetition, through reward, through pain. But the tragedy is this: sometimes we are rewarded for shrinking, punished for shining, and the brain doesn't question the fairness. It just remembers what hurt and what didn't. And so we repeat and repeat until one day we ask, why am I like this? And the answer is buried in a pattern we never chose, only learned. Pavlovian conditioning. Pavlovian conditioning is the invisible thread that ties our emotions, behaviors, and reactions to things that were never meant to control us. It's the reason a smell brings tears to your eyes, why a song makes your heart race, why a simple ringtone can spike your anxiety. It's not magic, it's training. Subconscious, relentless, emotional training, and it begins without your permission. Named after Ivan Pavlov, who made dogs salivate at the sound of a bell by pairing it with food, this phenomenon runs through every human life. Two unrelated things, one neutral, one powerful, get linked in the mind. Over time, the neutral one inherits the power, and suddenly you're responding to the bell, not the meal. In your life, it happens quietly. You associate your father's cologne with safety or fear. You link a classroom with humiliation. You tie affection to manipulation because someone once gave you both, and years later, you react the same way. Not because it still makes sense, but because your nervous system learned to brace itself. This conditioning shapes love, addiction, trauma, and healing. A text from someone toxic triggers excitement because pain got paired with attention. A door slam makes you flinch because anger wore that sound like armor. We become puppets to triggers we don't even recognize. But here's the truth: if you were conditioned, you can be reconditioned. Those reactions, while powerful, are not prophecy. They are echoes. And though they can roar, they do not own you. You can rewrite what the bell means. But first, you have to hear it ring. Operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is the quiet system behind almost every choice you make, the process by which your behavior is shaped, molded, and reinforced through consequences. At its core, it's a loop. You act, something happens, and your brain learns whether to do it again. Praise strengthens, punishment weakens, and over time, those invisible lessons become who you are. Every time you check your phone and see a notification, that tiny dopamine hit reinforces the behavior. Every time you speak up and get ignored, your instinct to stay quiet grows. It's not willpower, it's conditioning. Slowly, subtly, your environment trains you what to reach for, what to avoid, what parts of yourself to show, and which to hide. There are 4 basic tools in operant conditioning. Positive reinforcement gives you something good. Negative reinforcement removes something bad. Punishment adds pain. And extinction removes a reward until the behavior fades. But life doesn't label these neatly. Your mind just reacts. It starts to chase what feels rewarding. It starts to run from what feels unsafe. And without realizing it, you become a product of repeated consequences, some designed by others, many shaped by chance. This is how habits form, how people-pleasing is born, how anxiety becomes routine, not from one moment, but from thousands of micro-messages that teach you this works, that hurts, do more of this, never do that again. Operant conditioning doesn't ask what's right, it asks what's repeated. And over time, that repetition becomes identity, until one day you're not sure if your choices are truly yours or just responses to a world that trained you how to behave. Mimetic desire. Mimetic desire is the hidden engine behind so many of your wants. The idea that you desire something not because it's inherently valuable, but because someone else desires it first. It's the quiet, unconscious pull to imitate, to chase, to compete, not for the thing itself, but for what it means when someone else wants it. And just like that, your longing is no longer yours. It's borrowed, inherited, imitated. You see a person drawn to a partner, and suddenly they seem more attractive. A product sells out, and suddenly it feels essential. A career path looks more prestigious once it becomes someone else's dream. Mimetic desire doesn't whisper, "You need this." It whispers, "They want it. Don't be left behind." This force creates rivalry, jealousy, obsession, not because the object is rare or meaningful, but because it's wanted. And the more it's wanted, the more we convince ourselves it must be worthy. We start to define our goals not by our values, but by the people we're comparing ourselves to. Desire becomes a mirror, not a compass. But here's the danger. When your wants are shaped by others, so is your identity. You chase things to win admiration, not fulfillment. You end up in relationships, careers, lifestyles that were never meant for you, burning out on a life that was built for someone else's reflection. Mimetic desire isn't obvious. It hides behind ambition, behind status, behind should, and it can leave you aching, not because you didn't get what you wanted, but because you never stopped to ask if you truly wanted it at all. Temporal self-discontinuity. Temporal self-discontinuity is the unsettling fracture between who you are now and who you used to be, or who you're supposed to become. It's the feeling that your past self is a stranger, your future self a blurry outline, and your present self just trying to hold everything together. It's more than change. It's a disconnection, a break in continuity that leaves you wondering, am I still the same person? Will I ever feel like I'm becoming someone I recognize? This psychological distance warps how we treat ourselves. You look back at old decisions and feel shame, as if they were made by someone else. You make promises to your future self about saving money, getting healthy, being better, but fail to keep them because that you doesn't feel real yet. They're not you, not truly, just some abstract version living in another time. This disconnection can be liberating. You can reinvent, escape, evolve, but it can also be dangerous. It allows you to delay, sabotage, neglect, because if the person who pays the price or reaps the reward isn't truly you, it's easier to disregard their needs. It's why people smoke today, knowing they'll suffer later, why they procrastinate, overindulge, self-destruct, believing the consequences belong to someone else. Temporal self-discontinuity reveals just how fragile identity can be when stretched across time. When the past hurts too much to claim and the future feels too distant to protect, you're left floating in the now,
unanchored, uncommitted, and unsure if the person you're becoming will still recognize who you are today.
Delayed gratification. Delayed gratification is the quiet strength to say not yet in a world screaming right now. It's the ability to wait when every part of you is aching to give in for something greater, deeper, more meaningful down the line. It's choosing discipline over desire, patience over pleasure, the long game over the instant high. And it's one of the most powerful predictors of success, yet one of the hardest muscles to build. It shows up in the smallest moments, resisting the impulse to scroll when you should be creating, saving money instead of spending it the second it hits your account, walking away from the easy love that feels good but costs you your soul. It's in the decision to suffer a little now, to thrive later. Delayed gratification isn't glamorous. It's lonely. It often looks like sacrifice, like missing out, like standing still while others indulge. But what others call deprivation, you call direction, because you're not chasing the sugar rush. You're building something that lasts. But the real battle, it's internal. Your brain, hardwired for survival, craves immediacy, reward now, comfort now, validation now. To delay is to go to war with that wiring, to sit in discomfort, to believe without evidence that future you will be grateful you waited. And that belief, that faith, is what makes you unstoppable. Because anyone can take the easy win, but the ones who can pause, breathe, endure the hunger, those are the ones who don't just taste success. They own it because they know the wait is hard, but the reward is earned. Yerkes-Dodson Law. The Yerkes-Dodson Law is the delicate balance between pressure and performance, the truth that a little stress sharpens you, but too much breaks you. It's the curve that shows how arousal, mental, emotional, physiological, can fuel focus, creativity, and drive, but only up to a point. Beyond that, your mind begins to unravel, and what once pushed you forward now pulls you under. When stress is low, so is motivation. You drag your feet. Tasks feel meaningless. You coast, disengage, uninspired. But as pressure rises, a deadline looms, a goal takes shape, your heart beats faster. So does performance. You become alert, intentional, alive. Your mind locks in. Your body responds. You rise, but then, almost imperceptibly, it tips. The excitement turns into anxiety. The clarity becomes noise. Your thoughts race. Your hands tremble. Sleep disappears. And now, instead of rising, you're drowning, choking on cortisol, snapping at others, unable to breathe through the weight of your own expectations. This is where burnout begins, where perfectionism spirals, where people confuse their breaking point with weakness, not realizing they simply crossed an invisible line. The Yerkes-Dodson Law doesn't ask you to avoid stress. It begs you to understand it, to respect your limits, to recognize that pressure is a tool, but it's also a blade. And if you don't learn how to wield it, it will cut into your health, your focus, your joy. Because your best doesn't come from constant grind. It comes from the sweet spot between comfort and chaos. And the moment you leave that edge behind, you're no longer performing, you're surviving. Paradox of choice. The paradox of choice is the cruel twist hidden inside freedom. The idea that having more options, instead of making us happier, often leaves us more anxious, more doubtful, and more paralyzed. We think freedom lies in unlimited choice, but when faced with too many doors, we start to fear what's behind the ones we didn't open. We don't feel empowered. We feel trapped. You experience it when you spend hours picking a show and end up watching none. When you shop for something simple and spiral into reviews, ratings, regret. When you look at all the paths your life could take and wonder if choosing one means murdering all the rest. The more options you have, the more pressure you feel to make the perfect decision. And perfection? It's a prison. This paradox drains joy from the choices we do make, because after deciding, we don't feel relief. We feel loss.
Every yes feels like 1,000 no's, and even when we get what we want, the shadow of what could have been lingers, whispering, "Did you choose wrong?" In a world that glorifies endless options, where dating apps, career paths, lifestyles are infinite, we're drowning in possibility. But freedom isn't found in more. It's found in commitment, in choosing something fully and silencing the noise of everything else. The paradox of choice doesn't mean you shouldn't dream big. It means you have to stop expecting certainty from a world built on mystery. Because clarity isn't given. It's created by the courage to choose and the grace to stop looking back. Default effect. The default effect is the quiet force that shapes your decisions without you even realizing it. The tendency to stick with preset options simply because they're already chosen for you. It's why people stay in the same job, the same subscription, the same belief system, not out of passion, not out of certainty, but because change takes effort and inertia feels safe. It's everywhere. You sign up for a service, and unless you actively uncheck a box, you're billed monthly. You fill out a form, and unless you opt out, your data is shared. You accept the default retirement plan, health option, privacy setting, because it's easier than choosing, easier than thinking, easier than risk. But this effect runs deeper than convenience. It speaks to a basic human fear, the fear of making the wrong choice. When a default is already selected, it feels like someone else, someone smarter, has done the thinking for you. So you stay, you accept, you comply, and in doing so, you surrender agency piece by piece. The default effect shapes governments, economies, relationships. It's why donor rates skyrocket when organ donation is opt-out instead of opt-in. Why people stay in unhappy marriages, unrewarding careers, cities that no longer feel like home. Not because it's right, but because it's familiar. Because starting over, making a conscious choice, stepping into uncertainty feels like too much. But every default is a silent decision made on your behalf. And every time you accept one without question, you let the world decide your path. Not because you can't choose, but because you didn't stop long enough to realize you already were. Attentional bias. Attentional bias is the invisible magnet pulling your focus toward what already lives inside you. Your fears, beliefs, insecurities, desires. It's the reason two people can walk through the same moment and experience completely different realities. One sees danger, the other sees opportunity. One sees judgment in every glance, the other sees curiosity. The difference isn't in the world, it's in what their mind is trained to notice. Your brain can't process everything, so it filters. And what gets through that filter? What you expect, what you believe, what you fear. If you think you're not good enough, you'll fixate on rejection, even if it's not there. If you're grieving, you'll see reminders of loss in everything. If you're anxious, the world starts to feel like it's closing in. Not because it is, but because that's where your attention goes. Attentional bias is what makes pain louder. It turns small mistakes into defining moments. It spots every flaw in the mirror, but overlooks every strength. It hunts for confirmation that the world is unsafe, that you're unlovable, that nothing will change. And it finds it, not because it's true, but because you're constantly scanning for it. But here's the haunting truth. What you look for, you will find. And that makes attentional bias one of the most self-reinforcing traps in human psychology. You think the world is cruel, so you notice every cruelty. You think you're invisible, so you overlook every moment someone sees you. Your attention is a spotlight, and what you shine it on becomes your reality, even if it's only a sliver of the truth. Habituation. Habituation is the slow fading of intensity, the way your mind stops noticing what once felt overwhelming, thrilling, or even terrifying. It's the reason a song loses its magic after the 100th listen, why a beautiful view becomes background noise, why the scent of someone you love eventually disappears from your senses. It's not loss,
It's adaptation. Your brain, trying to survive the chaos of constant input, starts tuning out what stays the same. In the beginning, everything is vivid. The new car smell, the sound of applause, the rush of a new relationship. But the more you're exposed, the less your brain reacts. What once stirred emotion now blends into routine. What once sparked wonder now sits in silence. It's not that the thing changed, it's that you stop feeling it the same way. Habituation is protective. It helps us function. If we noticed everything with the same intensity every time, we'd burn out. So the brain conserves energy by focusing on change, on novelty, on danger. But in that protection, we sometimes lose something precious: awe, gratitude, presence. It's why people forget how much they once prayed for what they now take for granted. Why love feels dull, not because it's gone, but because it's been quiet too long. Why joy fades, not from absence, but from repetition. Habituation isn't cruelty. It's a function of survival. But if you're not careful, it numbs you to beauty, to connection, to life. The trick isn't to stop habituation. It's to interrupt it, to pause, to look again, and to remember that even the ordinary was once extraordinary until you stopped noticing. Mirror neuron response. Mirror neuron response is the silent echo in your brain, the reason you wince when someone gets hurt, smile when someone laughs, and feel your chest tighten when someone cries. It's the invisible current of human connection, where simply watching another's emotion or action awakens something identical inside of you. You don't just see it, you feel it, as if it were your own. Deep within your brain are mirror neurons, tiny but powerful cells that fire not only when you act, but when you observe someone else acting. When a mother sees her child stumble, her body tenses. When a crowd watches a runner cross the finish line, their own breath shortens. It's not imitation, it's empathy in motion, an automatic biological bridge between two human experiences. This response is why stories move us, why a movie can leave us sobbing, why a stranger's joy can lift our day. It's also why we mimic accents, gestures, postures without realizing. Our brains are wired to connect, to sync, to attune, to understand, not through words but through shared feeling. But mirror neurons are also why pain spreads, why watching violence leaves residue, why toxic environments breed more toxicity. When you surround yourself with fear, with anger, with cruelty, your brain rehearses those emotions over and over until they become your own. The mirror neuron response reminds us that we are not islands. We absorb each other, reflect each other, shape each other, and the way we move through the world, kind or cold, open or guarded, is not just seen, it's felt by every nervous system we pass. Altruistic punishment. Altruistic punishment is the fierce, self-sacrificing drive to enforce fairness, even when it costs you something. It's the stranger who steps in to stop a bully, the employee who reports a toxic boss despite the risk, the witness who testifies not for personal gain, but because it's wrong not to. It's justice paid for with discomfort, danger, or even pain, not for reward, but for principle. This behavior runs deep in the human psyche. We're wired not just for survival, but for social order. And when we see someone cheat, lie, or hurt others, something in us ignites. We burn to correct it, even when the injustice doesn't affect us directly, even when punishing it won't benefit us, especially then, because allowing it to stand feels like an infection, one that spreads if no one stops it. In this act of costly courage, altruistic punishment reinforces trust within communities. It sends a message. We protect each other here. It signals that decency still has defenders, but it's not without pain. Those who punish often face backlash. They're labeled troublemakers, whistleblowers, overreactors, yet they still act, because to them, silence is complicity. But there's danger in this instinct too. When wielded without compassion,
Altruistic punishment can become moral cruelty, fueled by ego or self-righteousness. What starts as justice can turn into vengeance, disguised as virtue. Still, this impulse is one of the most human things we have, a willingness to risk for the greater good, to stand when it would be easier to look away. And in a world that often rewards passivity, those who carry this fire remind us what it means to care, loudly and at a cost. Egocentric bias. Egocentric bias is the mental lens that subtly places you at the center of every story, not out of arrogance, but because your mind sees the world from the only eyes it's ever known, your own. It's the belief that your perspective is clearer, your experience more vivid, your role more significant than it actually is. Not because you think you're better, but because it feels like everything happens to you first. You overestimate how much people notice your mistakes, your appearance, your awkward silence. You assume others share your thoughts, your values, your emotions. You remember the group project where you pulled most of the weight, but forget how hard others worked behind the scenes. You replay arguments with a running tally of everything you said right and everything they said wrong. Egocentric bias is not selfishness, it's survival. Your brain is constantly scanning the world to figure out how it affects you. That's its job, but the cost is perspective. It makes you underestimate others' pain, dismiss different experiences, take things personally that were never about you. You think the silence in the room is judgment. The change in tone is resentment. The absence is rejection, when often it's just life happening to them, not because of you. This bias distorts connection. It makes empathy harder. It creates invisible walls in relationships, walls built from the illusion that your view is the full picture, but it's not. It's just one window in a world of endless angles, and unless you learn to look through theirs, you'll always be stuck in yours. Illusion of control. The illusion of control is the comforting lie we tell ourselves that we have more influence over life than we actually do. It's the gambler who blows on the dice, convinced it'll help. The driver gripping the steering wheel tighter during turbulence. The planner who believes that if they prepare enough, they can stop the storm from coming. It's not logic. It's fear dressed as confidence. This illusion isn't weakness. It's survival. When chaos surrounds us, the brain grasps for certainty. It creates cause and effect where there is none. It convinces us that effort equals outcome, that good behavior earns protection, that control is just one more decision away, because the alternative, the truth that so much is random, fragile, out of our hands, is unbearable. You see it in routines turned rituals, in the way people bargain with fate, in how we blame ourselves for things we never had power over. The breakup, the illness, the accident. We think, if I had done this differently, maybe it wouldn't have happened. We punish ourselves with hindsight, not because we were in control, but because pretending we were is less terrifying than admitting we weren't. The illusion of control offers peace at a steep cost. It makes you feel responsible for everything, including what's not yours to carry. It tricks you into thinking your anxiety can steer fate, but life doesn't obey superstition or spreadsheets or prayers whispered just right. And control, as much as we crave it, is often just the illusion we cling to in a world that was never meant to be predictable, but deeply lived anyway. Normative conformity. Normative conformity is the quiet surrender of authenticity in exchange for belonging, the invisible pressure to blend in, agree, and adapt, not because you believe, but because you fear standing alone. It's the moment you laugh at a joke you don't find funny, nod in a meeting when you disagree, change your opinion mid-conversation just to keep the peace. It's not weakness, it's survival, because the human heart is wired to crave acceptance, even at the cost of truth. You feel it in the subtle looks, the unspoken expectations, the way a room shifts when someone challenges the group. There's an edge to being different, a risk in dissent, and so you shapeshift your words, your tone,
your silence, all calibrated to avoid rejection. You don't want to be labeled difficult, weird, or wrong. You want to be part of the circle. So you step in line. But conformity doesn't just change behavior, it rewrites belief. The more you agree with what you don't feel, the more disconnected you become from your inner voice. You begin to doubt yourself, wonder if maybe they're right, and slowly you lose sight of where you end and they begin. Normative conformity builds false harmony, polished on the surface, fractured underneath. It protects relationships but corrodes honesty. It silences the whistleblower, shames the outlier, turns vibrant individuality into muted echoes. And the tragedy is, the very thing we crave, connection, can never be truly felt when we're hiding who we are to get it, because acceptance means nothing if it's built on a version of you that doesn't exist. Cultural lag. Cultural lag is the unsettling delay between the world we build and the values we carry. It's the tension that rises when technology evolves faster than our ethics, when society races forward but our beliefs, laws, and norms struggle to keep up. It's the aching space between what is possible and what we're ready for. It shows up everywhere. We invent powerful tools before we fully understand how to use them. We create social media that connects billions and then wonder why we feel more alone. We extend life with medicine but still argue over who deserves care. Artificial intelligence reshapes industries, but we still cling to centuries-old models of education and labor. Our systems stall, our minds hesitate, and the gap widens. Cultural lag isn't laziness, it's fear. Fear of letting go of the familiar, fear of rewriting identity, tradition, power. So we cling to outdated rules in a world that no longer fits them. We raise children with values designed for a reality that doesn't exist anymore. We legislate yesterday while living in tomorrow, and in that dissonance, confusion and conflict grow. The danger of cultural lag is that it makes progress feel like threat. It creates backlash, denial, polarization. People don't resist change because it's wrong. They resist it because it's fast and they're scared. But when culture stalls behind innovation, we build futures on foundations that can't hold them, and we wonder why everything starts to crack. Hyperbolic discounting. Hyperbolic discounting is the mind's quiet betrayal of the future, a bias that causes you to favor immediate pleasure over long-term gain, even when you know the future matters more. It's the reason you hit snooze instead of going for that morning run. Spend instead of save. Choose one more cigarette, one more episode, one more indulgence, despite the promises you made to your future self. This isn't laziness, it's wiring. Your brain is built to value what's close. A reward now lights up your dopamine system in ways a distant reward never can. Now feels real. Later feels like fiction. The further out a benefit lies, the less powerful it becomes. Not linearly, but rapidly, irrationally, so that 6 months from now might as well be 6 years. You tell yourself you'll change tomorrow, next week, next year. But when tomorrow comes, the value shifts again. What once felt worth the wait now feels too far away. And so you trade your goals for gratification, again and again. Hyperbolic discounting doesn't just shape your habits, it erodes your dreams. It convinces you that comfort today is more important than fulfillment tomorrow, that future pain isn't real enough to matter, until it is, until it arrives with the full weight of every shortcut taken. And by then, your future self is left holding a life you didn't mean to build, just the one your present self chose over and over, moment by moment, without ever intending to. Selective perception. Selective perception is the mind's quiet filter, the way we see the world not as it is, but as it fits what we already believe. It's why two people can witness the same moment, hear the same words, read the same headline, and walk away with completely different truths, not because one is lying, but because perception bends to expectation.
Your brain is constantly bombarded with information. It can't take it all in, so it prioritizes. And what it prioritizes is what confirms what you already think. If you believe someone is rude, you'll notice every sigh, every glance, every silence. If you think someone is kind, those same behaviors get a different story. We don't just process reality, we interpret it. And that interpretation is stained by memory, bias, fear, and hope. Selective perception shows up in relationships when you're convinced someone doesn't care, so you twist every word into proof. It shows up in politics, where facts are swallowed or denied depending on the flag they fly under. It shows up in how we see ourselves, focusing only on the failures that support our self-doubt, ignoring the victories that challenge it. The danger is that you stop seeing people, you start seeing projections, you stop listening to what's really said, you hear what you've already decided to expect, and reality becomes a loop, echoing your beliefs back at you until they feel like truth. Selective perception doesn't ask if something is real. It asks, does this match my story? And if it does, it stays. If it doesn't, it fades. Not because it wasn't true, but because your mind decided it didn't belong. Emotional contagion. Emotional contagion is the invisible current that passes between people, transferring moods, attitudes, and feelings like a silent virus. It's the reason you feel tense in a room full of anxious people, why someone's laughter lifts your spirit, or why one person's anger can infect an entire group. You don't even have to speak. Just being near someone is enough for your nervous system to start mirroring theirs. Not because you choose to, but because you're wired to. Humans are emotional sponges. We absorb without noticing. A sigh, a frown, a glance of panic, and your body reacts before your brain catches up. Mirror neurons fire, your facial muscles shift, your tone changes, and suddenly you're no longer feeling your emotion, you're carrying someone else's. This phenomenon is ancient. In tribes, synchronizing emotionally meant survival. If one person sensed danger, the whole group needed to feel it. But in the modern world, this instinct can overwhelm us. One toxic coworker can drain an entire office. One person's chronic negativity can start to sound like your own inner voice. You think you're just tired, but really, you've been absorbing someone else's storm. But emotional contagion isn't always negative. It's why joy spreads, why movements ignite, why kindness ripples. One brave, calm, or compassionate person can shift the energy of a whole room, because we don't just feel our own emotions, we borrow them, pass them, multiply them, and in every interaction, we have a choice to be the echo of someone else's chaos or the anchor that brings everyone back to center. Group polarization. Group polarization is the silent intensifier, the way people, when gathered in like-minded groups, don't just confirm their beliefs, they amplify them. What starts as a shared opinion quickly escalates into extremity. Mild becomes intense, uncertain becomes absolute, and suddenly the group isn't just agreeing, they're radicalizing each other without even realizing it. It begins innocently. You express a thought and someone nods, another adds to it. You feel seen, validated, safe. That safety gives you courage. You speak more freely, more boldly. Others do the same, and together you begin to drift, not outwardly forced, but internally pulled by the rising energy of agreement. In echo chambers, the middle ground erodes. Doubt feels like betrayal. Nuance gets drowned by certainty. No one wants to be the outlier in a room where everyone is nodding, cheering, reinforcing the same view. So you push a little further to fit in, to belong, and with every round of agreement, the group moves further from balance. Group polarization explains why online debates spiral, why movements harden, why people become more extreme after a meeting, a rally, a thread, not because they were brainwashed, but because they were affirmed, again and again, This effect doesn't just polarize groups, it changes individuals. You walk in with questions, you walk out with convictions. And the most dangerous part? It doesn't feel like radicalization. It feels like clarity, like truth rising in your chest, like certainty forged in connection, when in reality, it may only be the gravity of agreement, pulling you deeper into a version of belief that no longer has room for doubt. Desensitization. Desensitization is the slow, numbing erosion of emotional response, the way repeated exposure to something once shocking, painful, or deeply moving starts to feel normal. It's why the first time you see violence, your stomach turns, but the 10th time, you barely flinch. It's why tragedy in the news becomes background noise, why pain becomes routine, why you stop crying at things that used to break you. This isn't weakness, it's protection. The mind builds calluses around repeated wounds. It dulls the sharpness, not to make you cruel, but to help you cope. Your nervous system can only take so much before it starts shutting things down. And slowly, the thing that once hit like a storm becomes a whisper you barely hear. But desensitization doesn't just mute pain, it can mute empathy. It can make you look at suffering and feel nothing, laugh at things that once horrified you, ignore cries you would have answered before. It reshapes how you see the world and yourself, and sometimes you don't even realize it's happened until someone asks why you seem so disconnected. It creeps into relationships, into work, into daily life. You become numb to the chaos, the cruelty, even your own needs. You tell yourself you're just strong, just tired, just busy, but underneath, you've stopped feeling, and that numbness can become a prison. Desensitization is a survival response, but it comes at a cost, because when you stop feeling the bad, you often stop feeling the good too, and the longer you stay numb, the harder it is to remember what being fully alive even felt like.